AB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for the Notre Dame Midweek Rundown. So some of you were just expecting to see me, but for the first part of the show, you're going to get a double dose. You're going to get double R. Ryan Roberts is going to be with us today. Ryan, you were supposed to have the day off, but I said, hey, man, I got to get you on to talk about RJ Oben because that's the big news. Well, one of two bits of big news today that we are going to discuss. We're going to talk about RJ Oben and his commitment to Notre Dame. Ryan will be part of that. We'll talk a little bit about draft profiles and things along those lines, fit and all that type of good stuff. Then I'm going to talk about Joe Walt's decision to go to the NFL and just kind of briefly talk about that. And then what that means for the future of the offensive tackle position, because Notre Dame is going to have to replace both tackles, which we thought at the beginning of the year was possible, as we thought Blake Fisher was going to have a jump this season as a junior. But as we watched Blake play, it didn't make sense. You didn't think they would lose both, but in fact, they did lose both. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the future of the offensive tackle position. And then we'll also have a little mini mailbag. I told you guys that I will get any mailbag questions that you get in before the show starts, or any super chat questions that you get in. We will go ahead and answer those as well. So that'll be the three parts today. But Ryan, thank you for joining me today on the Midweek Rundown, man.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you for inviting me on. You did make it sound like I was off today entirely. Like I am still working. I'm just off of the podcast.
No, off
today.
Of the show.
So
there's days so Ryan can just grind and get phone calls made and do all that kind of stuff and not have a burden of every single day doing 3-4 hours in the show. So off from the podcast platform. Today is definitely a work day. But Ryan, the big news today.
Yep.
The most recent big news today is RJ Oben, the defensive end, fifth-year senior defensive end from Duke. He'll be a sixth-year senior next year. Yep. Has announced his decision to transfer to Notre Dame. This is expected news. We've kind of known since this weekend. It was an interesting little bit of a backstory, Ryan. He had 2 visits scheduled. He had one to Notre Dame last weekend, the 8th to the 10th. He arrived Friday night, left on Sunday. And then he was going to visit Florida State next weekend because Florida State was making a very hard push, and talked to a couple sources down there. Florida State definitely wanted RJ Oben to get down there. They were definitely making a push for him. But instead of making that visit, he decided during the visit he was going to come to Notre Dame and play for Notre Dame. So we thought there might have been a chance the decision was made earlier in the week, but I think the way that Notre Dame is just kind of controlling this entire week, you had Hartman's decision on Monday. You've got Riley Leonard on Tuesday. You got Joe Walt, and then RJ Oben today. You'll have some more big opt-outs over the next couple of days. Are going to come out from Notre Dame players, so we'll be here to discuss those as well. But obviously, the good news for Notre Dame today was RJ Oben's decision, Ryan. And first and foremost, let's just talk about this. This is a big win from the standpoint of last year you went toe-to-toe with a kid that seemed like a Notre Dame fit in Braden Fisk, and you lost. He went to Florida State. Now, that ended up not being the miss that we thought it would be. I thought Braden played really well at Florida State, but Riley Mills and Howard Cross really stepped up and played big-time football this year. You had Gabriel Rubio, when he was healthy, was pretty good. Jason Onye. So Notre Dame ended up being pretty good there. Now, of course, they would have been even better if they'd had those two plus Braden Fisk, but they were okay at D-tackle when they missed Braden Fisk. Now you get out there and Florida State goes 13-0, but you were able to go out and beat them for this kind of player for Notre Dame, Ryan. So just to begin with, that's a big win for this Notre Dame staff.
I mean, absolutely, especially when you're going against a Florida State team that, although they did not end up making the college football playoff, they are the ACC champs. They are undefeated. They have a lot of momentum going in their direction. They're recruiting well on the high school side of things, obviously, and then they have they have their packages that they can put out there for players as well. What Mike Norvell is doing down in Tallahassee is very appealing to a lot of players. Obviously, like he's regaining the momentum of what Florida State football stands for. So anytime that you beat a school like a Florida State that really wants a talented pass rusher, especially because, Brian, Florida State's been pretty good with developing pass rushers over the years. I mean, they've done a pretty good job. I mean, they have a kid this year in Jared Verse that's going to go in the first round. They've had guys like Josh Sweat in the past that were really good football players, and the Walker kid that was his first name, D Walker. I can't remember his name. Anyway, drafted in like the second round. But they have really developed. DeMarcus Walker is the name that I was thinking of. They've had some really good defensive ends, obviously, over the last few years, and that is a position that should be appealing, obviously, to a player like an RJ Oben. But Notre Dame being able to get him to come up to South Bend for his final year, I think it's a big win for that simple fact alone. It's also a big win just from where Notre Dame is as a defensive end room in general, because one thing that I think needs to be better next year is you need to be able to affect the passer a lot better than what you did in 2023. Like the sack numbers were down, the pressures were down. Notre Dame just needs to be a better pressure team in general, all the way, from the inside to the outside, obviously. So I think this gives you a guy that has tremendous upside as a pass rusher and can affect a quarterback. So I think just from the big need on the roster, from a penetration, from a quarterback harassment perspective, on top of beating Florida State for a talented kid like this, I think there's a lot of areas that this is a big win for Notre Dame.
Couple thoughts in response to that, Ryan. Number one, to back up your point about the lack of production, as good as this defense was this year, and it was excellent. Last year in 13 games, Notre Dame had 85 tackles for loss. That's 6.5 tackles for loss per game. This season, they're sitting at 67, which is 5.5. So unless they have, 18 tackles for loss in the bowl game against Oregon State, they're not going to match last year's number. The sack numbers are even worse. They were actually – one positive from this year, Ryan, was there was to me a little bit of a greater gap between run stops, like run negatives and pass negatives for the defense. Meaning there was fewer sacks, but I think the tackle for loss was slightly better from a percent standpoint. Not great, but still better. But You also had 27 sacks this year in 11 games and 38 last year. So that means unless you get 11 sacks. I mean, look, if Notre Dame gets 18 tackles for loss and 11 sacks in the bowl game, we're going to be very, very, very happy people. That's not happening.
They probably win.
They're going to win by a bunch. That's not happening. So to your point, for all the great things that Notre Dame did this year, those are areas where there has to be improvement. And from a pass game standpoint, this is obviously an area where RJ Oben adds value, which we'll get into. But I don't think we can discount the fact that, look, do I know this is exactly what happened? No, I don't. But it can't be dismissed that as RJ Oben looks at what happened at Florida State the last couple of years with really good production from the defensive line position, especially defensive end. Then he watches Notre Dame, and their success has been at the Viper position. And then you watch what Javonte Jean-Baptiste did this year in this defense and say, hey, that guy, I'm a better player than that guy. I played a lot more than that guy did at Ohio State. If he can do that, I can come in and do that. And to see the jump that Javonte made as a player, not just production-wise, but also his skill set evolved in 1 year under Al Washington, to say, hey, look, now Al Washington has something in his arsenal to go to these players and say, hey, look what I did. I look what I did with Isaiah Foskey in my first year. Look at the production he had. He was a second-round NFL draft pick. Look what we did with getting Howard Cross to become an All-American. We got Riley Mills to take a big jump. Took Javonte Jean-Baptiste, was a backup rotation guy at Ohio State, turned him into a really good football player, highly productive player. 9.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, a bunch of pressures this season, over 30 pressures this season. I think he was one behind Howard Cross on Pro Football Focus for most pressures on the Notre Dame defense. Guy that was a big play guy. So now the package to sell to a guy like RJ Oben is a lot more impressive than maybe what it was a year ago, when honestly, even Isaiah Foskey's success was often looked at as, Ryan, as kind of like a disappointment. He didn't really play that great. The way the defensive line played this year under Al Washington is certainly ammunition for him to be able to use on the recruiting trail, but also on the portal trail, because you brought a portal kid in and he had a lot of success for Notre Dame. That's going to help you win these battles as well, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I think that, and I mean, honestly, Brian, like I would even add to it a little bit. Not only did you get a big time because a lot of people wanted RJ Oben, right? Like we talked about Florida State as one of the main suitors, but everybody wants to add depth to a really talented defensive line. Everybody wants to do that. There is never enough pass rushers in today's game. So RJ Oben had a lot of suitors for him. I would say this also to add in the importance of RJ Oben is that I was actually convinced before he entered the portal that he was probably going to be in the 2024 NFL drafts. I mean, that was where I thought he was going, because if you've followed Jim Nagy, who's the director of the Senior Bowl, the Reese's Senior Bowl that plays out in Mobile, Alabama, I mean, he has been tweeting about RJ for months, like months. I know I don't know for a fact that he got an invite from the Senior Bowl, but I would be shocked just based upon reading the tea leaves that if he was not going to be a Senior Bowl guy, if he chose to declare for the draft. But for whatever reason, whether that's the NFL draft advisory feedback or whatever, RJ Oben wanted to go back for one more year and to take his game to hopefully a much higher level to go into the next 2025 NFL draft. So he's a well-liked player from the NFL side, obviously from the college side. He's been a productive player over the last couple of years. He fits the profile as well. I mean, you look at that kid, you're like, that's a 6'4", 260-pound, good-looking kid, man. I mean, like you just had Isaiah Foskey 2 years ago. You had Javonte Jean-Baptiste that had kind of the same look to him of an NFL defensive end, and then added another one. I mean, it's going to start to be a much easier sell for big-time defensive ends coming to Notre Dame because they're going to look at these body types when they're on the visits as well and say, like, that's an NFL dude right there, right? Like that looks what it's supposed to look like on Sundays. So a massive get, even just from the standpoint of RJ Oben could be playing NFL football this time next year if he wanted to be. And he chose to go back, and you got an NFL defensive end to come to play football for you in 2024.
So where exactly do you think his range would have been coming in this season, Ryan? Because I'm going to ask this in relation to something else. It's kind of a setup question.
I think that there was from everything I've heard from the NFL side of things, there was a little bit of a question as far as like run game impact for RJ, because we'll talk about that. And you just didn't see it a ton on the Duke team, obviously, over the last couple of years. You saw pass rush impact, you saw penetration impact, but you didn't consistently see run game impact. So I still think there was a question of like the well-roundedness of his game. But again, 6'4", 260 with the twitch that this kid has, I would be very surprised if he got out of the 4th to 5th round just based upon pure athletic gifts. And if he goes to the Senior Bowl and he blows it up and he does really well at the combine, maybe he ends up going somewhere on day 2. It's possible. But I think 4th to 5 was a very solid range for RJ this year if he entered.
And people aren't going to ignore the genes. I mean, let's be honest. That's going to be a factor in it, obviously, with his dad being an NFL offensive
tackle. It's a huge factor, man. That's a huge factor that people don't talk enough about with Joe Alt, is that, like, when you're talking about checking boxes, his dad's in the ring of honor for the Kansas City Chiefs as an offensive lineman. Like, that lineage and that gene pool, that matters a lot for NFL teams, without a doubt.
So when you look at RJ Oben, obviously, Ryan, when we were having this conversation over actually less than a year ago, because Notre Dame's moving a little bit quicker on some of this portal stuff than they were a year ago. Javonte Jean-Baptiste was a pickup that we liked for Notre Dame, but it was more of a rotation guy, a guy that you kind of thought maybe if he has a big year, maybe he can sneak into the draft.
Yes,
because there were some things to like. Where now you've got a guy that is more established. Javonte was kind of a rotation guy. There was a lot of traits that I liked. I know there were traits that you liked in Javonte, but it was a projection. Could he play field end? Because he had more of a Viper body. He looked more like Isaiah Foskey than he did Khalid Kareem, at Ohio State and even at Notre Dame. But then you say, okay, well, how's he going to be as a field end? He's just going to bring pass rushing production. That's what he was in college, right? A pass rusher. That was his best part of his game at Ohio State. He was actually a better run defender for Notre Dame this year than even a pass rusher from a number standpoint, right? He had 9.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. And so now you look at a kid that has more proven production, I think more explosiveness, I would argue. I don't know if it's like by a ton, but certainly noticeable more first step explosiveness. I don't believe RJ's as long as Javonte was, but still long and plenty long enough, right? I think Javonte has really freaky long arms. Like not I don't know, maybe not quite like Khalid Takuba Ogundeji, but they're pretty long.
No, not like that.
RJ doesn't have that, but he's got plenty of length. That I've never watched film and be like, boy, this guy's length is a problem. These tackles are eating him up because he's not long enough. Yep. So when you look at the pickup, Ryan, I think it makes a lot of sense. And here's where Notre Dame is at, right? They have a lot of young talent at the position that they like a lot. I think we'll see Josh Burnham there at times. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Josh play some of that in the bowl game with Nana gone, behind Javonte Jean-Baptiste. They're guys like, Boubacar Traore could move over there depending on how his offseason goes from a weight gain standpoint. Brennan Vernon is a kid they like there. Tyson Ford is a kid that's got some potential and shows some flash there. So there's a lot of potential there. But this is kind of like a position that's a little different than quarterback. It makes a lot more sense to bring in a veteran, especially a guy with his DNA, his character, where he came from, an academic-oriented school. He went to a really good academic high school. Like, this kid's got the development to be that immediate leader type of guy on defense, along with, I would say probably more his position than the D line, because the D line is going to have plenty of leaders with Howard Cross and Riley Mills and guys like that. But at that position, he can be that mentor type of player for
Yep.
the younger guys that are coming along. And then they can also play. They'll get a chance to play. Whereas the quarterback is like, okay, you've got your guy, you can be a mentor, but they're not going to play. In this case, he will play, but so will the other guys in the rotation. So I do think it makes a lot of sense. And it would have been exciting about the potential if they decided not to bring in a big end, a field end in this class or in this portal class, but it would have left a big question mark about, can that group really step up and play? Now, like I said, this helps bridge the gap a little bit, Ryan. And the other part of it too is, if the young big ends really emerge, RJ Oben's a kid that I believe, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I think you and I talked about this before the show, that could also play some in the boundary in certain pass rushing situations as well, Ryan. So he's not a field end only guy. I think this is a kid that in certain looks could play. He showed more twitch this year than Jordan Patelho did for Notre Dame as a pass rusher.
Well, I think there's a couple of the boundary ends on Notre Dame's roster, because you mentioned, if you get a little bit of Joshua Burnham over into the boundary at times, like you start to now have a couple kids that are a little bit more interchangeable between field and boundary as well. So yeah, I could definitely see if it's, a 3rd and 9 and an obvious pass situation, could you throw RJ Oben to the field and just let him feast on a right tackle, let's say, per se? Like, yeah, that could happen for sure. Like, I think that Notre Dame could definitely explore those options. I also wouldn't be opposed to him rushing inside in some like NASCAR looks and obvious pass rushing situations. Like, I think that he brings a little bit of alignment versatility as a pass rusher, not alignment versatility as in like he's going to play 3 tech on 1st and 10, right? But like against an obvious passing situation, he can line up at field. He can line up to the boundary. I even think that you could put him inside at times. This kid is just we always talk about floor and ceiling, right? I think that he slightly raises the ceiling, but you already had very talented defensive ends in that room. I think what this does is it substantially raises the floor, because now you have proven production coming in. Like, RJ Oben at worst is going to help the pass rush game. At worst, he's going to do that for you. So you add in him now helping to groom the younger big ends in the room and then take their step forward. I think that potentially you could use those guys in a lot of different roles, and that only helps to bolster the pass rush and the playmaking potential. And also, I'll say this, Brian, I know you love these types of players, the guys that make plays in the biggest moment of the game. I was talking to Jamion Franklin, former Notre Dame player who also played at Duke, obviously, the last 3 years. So he was around RJ a lot. The one thing he said about RJ as a player is that when they needed a big play or a sack on a crucial down, it was usually 94 that was making the play. So that's all you really want out of that position. Not only do you want production, but you want the production in the biggest moments of the game. And I think that could be RJ Oben next year.
Well, we talked about that with Khalid Kareem. I've talked about that a bunch of times with Khalid. We saw that from Javonte Jean-Baptiste this season as well, which was a big part of what endeared me to him to me, I should say, is that it was, he would be good throughout a game, but when it was that you needed a 3rd down stop, either run game or pass game, he was a lot of times that guy that would step up and make that play. And Notre Dame had a lot more guys like that this year, Ryan, which is why even though their disruptive production was down significantly from last season, then you look at this season and it's like, but they were a way better defense this year because they made the stops when they needed to make the stops. And those were obviously big parts of what we're doing here. So there's a lot to like about this from just a Notre Dame fit standpoint, or a Notre Dame need standpoint. When you're breaking down, just looking at where were the need for Notre Dame. Let's talk specifically about RJ's skill set and a more direct fit into what Notre Dame does, but also some areas where we want to see RJ take a jump and maybe evolve as a player. And I think this is something that they're going to ask him to do. Number one, when you talked about it, Ryan, this is a kid that brings a lot of pass rushing potential to the table. When you look at his last 3 years at Duke, RJ Oben had 4 sacks in 2021. He had 4.5 sacks in 2022, and he had 23 sacks. He had, that'd be nice, right? He had 5 sacks in 2023. And when you look at the pressure numbers, Ryan, this past season, his overall pressure numbers were down. According to Pro Football Focus, he had 27 total pressures this season, which was tied for first on Duke's defense. But in 2022, he had 37 pressures in 2022, which is more than Isaiah Foskey ever had at Notre Dame. And then he had 29 the year before. So this isn't a kid that's just putting some sacks together, right? This is a kid that is going to do a lot what we've seen Notre Dame do in recent years, which is it's not just about sacks. It's about getting pressures on the quarterback. And when you look at this season and how things shaked out, he was tied with Aeneas Peoples for most pressures, but he had 13 total hits on the quarterback. The next closest guy on that Duke defense was 7, and that was Trey Freeman. And I'm looking, Dwayne Carter, for example, had 5. And so you're talking about a kid that the sacks were only 5, but this is a kid that got hits on the quarterback with some really good frequency this season. And that's a big important part of this. It's not just about sacks. It's like you say, it's about disruption. And he's a kid that showed the ability to get disruption even when it wasn't necessarily resulting in a sack.
Well, and I think the reason that is transferable is that when you're scouting a defensive end or an edge player, and this goes from high school to college or it goes college to the NFL, it's such an important position from a traits perspective, because you are talking about a position that in a lot of instances, and it's a little bit different at the boundary end or the field end compared to the boundary end, because you're working against tight ends a lot and a little bit of extra trash. But in a lot of situations, you are going to be one-on-one, mano-a-mano, in a little bit of increased space as a pass rusher a lot of times. So in those instances, you're looking for the physical gifts. And I think that what makes RJ so impressive or such an upside-oriented player is that he kind of just hits a good level on every aspect that you would want at the position. 6'4", 260, we've talked about. Really clean frame as well. I think he could hold 270 without much issue, and he wouldn't sacrifice any athleticism. He's got a good level of length. I would agree with you. Like, it's not an Adi. It's not a, it's not a he had more length than Dalen Hayes. Right. It's not a Khalid Kareem or those freakazoids that have 35-inch arms. Like, it's not there. It's not even Isaiah Foskey that had 34-inch arms. Like, it's not to that level, but it's a good level. You look at it and say, that's a box checked. Size, length. He has a good wingspan. He also is a twitchy player. Like, he can get off the line of scrimmage and you can see that first step explosiveness is good. It is good level. And then he also has some good moves in the arsenal as a pass rusher. Like, I've seen him hit a club rip. I've seen him hit a ghost move. I've seen him just win the outside track. I've seen him hit some inside counters as well, to the inside track. So I look at him and I say, as a pass rusher, as an edge player, as a defensive end, he brings a toolbox to the table that is an NFL caliber toolbox and projects higher, honestly. I mean, there is a level that I don't think similar to the Riley Leonard talk. Riley Leonard is a very talented player, but the exciting part is that we have not seen the best of Riley Leonard yet, in my opinion. I don't think we've seen the best of RJ Oben either. I think that he still has a level to go higher. And the reason that I think that is because he has some easy athletic gifts that you look at and say, I could work with that 100%.
I think the other thing, too, is about how he was used. And this isn't a criticism of Duke, because Mike Elko did a tremendous job building that defense up, right? I mean, they were a very good defense. However, the way that they use that position at Duke is not the way that Notre Dame will use that position at moving forward. And here's a couple differences, right? Number one, they would play that position a lot, stand up at times. He was mostly a field. They would put him in the boundary in some games in their nickel packages. They put him into the boundary as a pass rusher in their nickel stuff. So he did have some boundary pass rush opportunities this year. But most of his production came from the field position. They'd move him around, but a lot of times he was playing wide. He wasn't a guy that was playing nearly as much on the tackle as Notre Dame asks their field end to do. Now, Notre Dame will ask they asked Javonte Jean-Baptiste to bring pressure from outside, from width, but not nearly as much as they had him on the tackle. And either sometimes it'd be a head up, Ryan, sometimes it'd be a 4-eye, depending on the look. But a lot of times it was in a 5 or a loose 5, like a 7 type situation if it was a tight end. So you're going to see him playing a little bit more on the tackle. And I think that's going to help him because he has a really nice array of pass rush moves, but sometimes he's got a really nice spin move. But sometimes the spin move would be impacted by the fact he was coming from such depth that it was almost impossible to set it up. and he'd have to get it so early that it would be easier to tackle. When his spin moves really effective is when he was a little bit tighter in his alignment, so he could kind of hit it quicker, like get that guy vertical, get him oversetting, and then boom, spin him inside, beat him inside. That's when he'd be really effective. He was really good at shooting gaps, as you said. The things that you were talking about with the quickness on the inside penetration, those are all going to be more beneficial to him at Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is going to use him, I would imagine, just like they did Javonte Jean-Baptiste, which is a lot more of a true end as opposed to a loose edge, the way that he was used at Duke. And that's not better or worse. It's just different. Duke played their defense differently.
Yep.
And it worked for them. And at Notre Dame, they'll ask him to do more stuff like right on that edge. And that's the part of his game that, to me, there's a part of his game that a lot, to me, I believe, allows him to potentially be more disruptive at Notre Dame and be more productive at Notre Dame than even was at Duke. But the second part of it, Ryan, is the one big concern I have about RJ Oben is we haven't seen him be used as an edge setter a whole lot. Now, I think he's decent at it when he's asked to do it, but he's just not asked to do it a lot. There's two things about it. Number one, I agree. Now, he's got the one criticism I have of him is he tends to play high when he comes from width. He'll tend to kind of raise his body up, and that's when he loses either as a pass rusher or an edge setter. So he's going to have to work on keeping his pads low. But I thought Javonte Jean-Baptiste had that problem at times at Ohio State as well. And Al Washington did a great job of working that out of him. And his pad level at Notre Dame was really good a lot of the time. So that's where you say, hey, you're going to get worked on that. But because you'll look at his numbers, Ryan, the last 3 years, you talk about he's 5.5, 6.5, and 6 tackles for loss, 4, 4.5, and 5 sacks. But his tackle numbers were 21, 20, and 17. That's it. Right? Well, a lot of that is how he was used. So, for example, he's going to come inside, and they're going to run jet sweeps and outside zones right outside of him. Now, either he had zero instincts as a football player and his backups had zero instinct as football players, or that's their responsibility. You crash, we're flowing hard over top with our Mike and our Rovers coming down, which is what Duke did. Their edge setter, and if you guys remember this from Notre Dame, that's a little bit how Notre Dame kind of used their Rover in 2017 under Elko with Drew Tranquil, which is more of a true linebacker. And that's why he had double-digit tackle for loss numbers that season. So they used him kind of as a disruptor off the edge, not a run producer. If you kind of, he would kind of take on blocks at times, but and the other thing too is when you watch the film, teams don't run to the field a whole lot against Duke either because of the way they play their Mike, their Rover, and their field safety. So when you actually watch Duke play, there's not a lot of instances for him to take on, counters and pulls and things like that, right? Because teams were so boundary oriented. And when they would run to the field, a lot of times it was outside zones and jets to try to get outside of the mic in the field end kind of quickly. So that played a role in the production as well. Notre Dame, the way they play structurally, forces a little bit more field action in the run game, in my opinion, which is why Javonte Jean-Baptiste had such a jump in production with 47 tackles for loss this season and 9.5 tackles, 47 tackles and 9.5 tackles for loss. So he's going to have to improve in that area, Ryan. It's, there's some technical things that have to improve upon, doing a better job of this base, anchoring, not playing high as much as he did. But as you mentioned, the strength, the power, the body, the frame, the length, all those things are there for him to develop it, just like Javonte Jean-Baptiste, because that was our biggest question mark about Javonte Jean-Baptiste at this time a year ago, or whenever he made his decision a year ago. It was, okay, this guy could bring some value as a pass rusher, but can he set the edge? Al Washington saw something in him that said he can do that, and he coached him up and made him a better player, and he was a really good edge setter this season. And I think RJ Oben has an opportunity to do the same thing if he takes to Al Washington's coaching the way that Javonte Jean-Baptiste did.
I mean, the building blocks are there for sure. I remember when they first got Javonte Jean-Baptiste, we had him on the Blester report from the previous year because he had a 7th round NFL draft grade, but they also had the official on his measurement. And I'm pretty sure he was only like 247, 248 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. And obviously he had bulked up to around 260 pounds at Notre Dame. But the great thing about RJ Oben is he's already 260 pounds. Like, you don't need to pack a ton more weight on his frame necessarily. I think it's just about, from a technical perspective now, playing with better pad level, playing with better hand placement, being a little bit more violent at the point of attack. Those are coaching points. Like, physically, I don't need to give anything to RJ Oben right now to make him a better fit at big ends. I just need him to get comfortable playing that role and playing through contacts. And it's all about the coaching points. Where do my hands go? Where do my feet go? where do my eyes go? Where do my hips go? Everything is just about placement and physicality. From there, I already have a physically imposing, talented defensive end, a guy that looks the parts. You don't have to build that up. It's not like a true freshman coming in where you're like, I need to pack on 20 pounds on him and
Right.
still work on the technique. You have the building blocks already in place for an RJ Oben. It's about the finer points of coaching, which
Right.
Al Washington impressed me this year. He did.
Yes.
He got a lot
There's a lot
out
of
of
guys.
Javonte Jean-Baptiste is one that you mentioned. He got a lot out of Javonte. Got a lot out of Howard Cross, got a lot out of Riley Mills. He got a lot out of a lot of guys on this defensive line. So I'm excited to see what Al Washington can do with RJ Oben,
Right.
who I actually think is, from the starting point, maybe a little bit better of a fit into this role than what Javonte Jean-Baptiste was to start. Now, Javonte obviously developed,
right?
But now it's about using those building blocks and developing them if you're Al Washington.
We've seen a lot more from RJ Oben of what he'll be asked to do at Notre Dame than what we saw from Javonte Jean-Baptiste at Notre Dame. And in 5 years at Ohio State, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who played a lot fewer snaps, right? It's going to factor into it, had 10 tackles for loss and 8 sacks. In the last 3 years, RJ Oben has had 18 tackles for loss and 13 and a half sacks.
Yep.
So as you mentioned, you're getting a guy that has proven production in a Power 5 conference. And a guy that, as you said, Ryan, has had some pretty good games and some key moments. I mean, he had a couple really good pressures against Notre Dame, against Blake Fisher, I felt, in that game as well. So, he's a guy
I think he had one against Joe Wald. I could be wrong in that game, but I thought he had one against Joe Wald too in that game.
He had a pressure. So on that pressure, there was I went back and watched that. There was a snap issue, and Joe was laid off the ball. And then RJ beat him outside because of a snap. Yeah, I saw that too. But
isn't it so funny? That's so funny. That I think that just speaks to how great Joe Wald is. Sorry to cut you off, but the two pressures I remember against Joe Wald, one was probably a mistimed snap. The other one was his guard tripping him. Those are the only two pressures I ever remember Joe Wald giving up this year, which is just incredible.
Yes. Couple things about it too, Ryan. When I look at RJ Oben, here's another part of it too. When you break down the trajectory of his film, here's something that I noticed, and I'm curious if you noticed it this season. I actually felt his best year was 2022. I thought he was more explosive. I thought he was more impactful in the run game. I thought he was a guy that was just a little bit more overall productive from an all-around standpoint. This year, I thought early in the season, he wasn't quite as good as I thought he was going to be honest with you. He was a guy that I just thought early in the season, he just didn't look like he had the kind of burst that I wanted to see. I mean, he had some nice games early in the season. He had a good game he actually had a really good game against Clemson. But the next few games, I wasn't blown away by him. The Northwestern game, he had good production, but I don't know that I was like really blown away by it. Their tackles, I didn't think were very good. UConn, he didn't do a whole lot. He had a couple nice pressures against Notre Dame, but as you got later in the year, I thought his overall performance got better and better and better, especially against the run. So he only had 9 total run stops this year, according to Pro Football Focus. 6 of them came in the last 3 games. And he just looked a lot more explosive. He looked a lot more like he did last year at Duke, where he just was really explosive off the ball. So I wonder if maybe he was battling a little bit of a, coming out of that Clemson game, maybe a little bit of a something that kind of just slowed him down maybe for a month. And I, I'm just kind of reaching here. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but like he only played like 19 snaps against UConn, and his snaps are pretty consistent, but just his overall play was not as much. But you also talk about too is Duke used him pretty much, as a pass rusher. I mean, if you look at his numbers according to Pro Football Focus, he was on the field for 161 run snaps, and he was on the field for 243 pass snaps.
Yes.
Whereas you look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste, it was kind of similar numbers, but he just had more snaps against the run this season. So it's going to be interesting to see how I like the fit, Ryan. I think the fit makes a lot of sense. I think this is this is good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that it makes a tremendous amount of sense because from the personal perspective, from the background perspective of what the couple of attractive things that we always talk about with Notre Dame players fitting is the academic side of the piece, obviously, when he is a graduate from Duke. So that obviously means a lot to him. The other thing is that former NFL fathers are usually very pro Notre Dame, right? Because they know life after football and how quickly it ends. And so I'm sure that Roman Oben is probably very pro Notre Dame, I would assume at this point, right? So that makes a lot of sense. And also I would say this, Brian, is that I think I said this earlier in the show, I don't think we've seen the best of RJ Oben yet either, right? Like I think he's coming back in my opinion, based upon things that I've heard, is that I think he's coming back because I think he knows that he could be better, right? Like
Yeah.
he knows it. If we just get the player that we had at Duke to come to Notre Dame next year, I think he's good. He's a very good addition. But I would say this is that compared to Javonte Jean-Baptiste, which ended up being a really good pickup for Notre Dame, I think this one has more upside because I think there are more building blocks to work with RJ than in Javonte. Now, obviously, what made Javonte such a good player this year is that he obviously put his head down and worked his butt off to be the best version of himself this year. Will RJ be the same? I have no idea. I don't personally know him. I don't know his work ethic. I'm assuming it's good based upon his upbringing and everything. But ultimately, I think that if you are able to get the best out of RJ Oben, this could be one of the more because it's not super underrated. I think he was a top 15 player on like the 247 transfer portal, right? So like he's a respected player. But if you get the most out of him, I truly believe that this kid could be a difference maker. I wouldn't be shocked if we're talking 10 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in 2024. Like, I wouldn't be shocked at all about it because I think he has that type of upside to the game.
Yeah, agree. So this is a good pickup for Notre Dame, Ryan. We're gonna transition next to Joe Alt. Can I ask you one question, Ryan? I'm gonna dive into the Joe, like a lot of the Joe Walton, the offensive tackle stuff. Do you mind just kind of hanging around for like the first 5 minutes so we just kind of talk about Joe Walton, NFL kind of
Sure.
projection, some fits for him, things along those lines, and then you can take off and get back to work, and I'll kind of talk about the rest of it. So,
Sounds
but
good.
before we go to that, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you are listening via podcast platform, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And of course, if you haven't done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You're going to really like what we've got going on. So lot of good intel, a lot of changes coming. It's going to be a lot of fun. So you're definitely going to check that out. Again, that's boards.irishbreakdown.com. The other bit of big news today, Ryan, and obviously not as good for Notre Dame, but expected, certainly expected. We've known this is going to happen, was the announcement that Joe Alt is going to leave for the National Football League and is going to opt out of the bowl game. And both aspects were certainly expected. When Ryan departs, I'll talk about some of the All-American stuff going on with Joe Alt and Xavier Watts, which is really cool. But Ryan, I want to first talk before we get into the Notre Dame impact, give you a chance to kind of talk about the NFL draft aspect. Obviously, Joe Walt's coming out, and what I have read, have you speak on, is considered a pretty good tackle class.
Yes,
but he's a guy that's coming out after 3 years. This is not something that happens often at Notre Dame. Quentin Nelson stayed for 4. Ronnie Stanley stayed for 4. Mike McGlinchey stayed for 5. Liam Eichenberg stayed for 5. Robert Hainsey stayed for 4. And also a guy that's opting out of a bowl game, something that we have not seen from past Notre Dame offensive linemen. But when you look at his NFL projection, Ryan, where does he kind of stack up right now amongst the offensive tackles in the draft class? Where do you what range do you see him going, and just some early ideas on some early fits? Obviously, we don't know what the draft order is going to be fully yet, but some teams that are kind of battling for that top 10 spot. What are some potential landing spots that you could see for Joe Alt in the upcoming NFL draft?
Well, first and foremost, it's an excellent offensive tackle class. I mean, people are going to talk about Joe Alt. They're going to talk about Olu Fashanu as the top 2 tackles in whatever order you have them. But after that, you're still going to be talking about guys like J.C. Latham and Amarius Mims, potentially out of Georgia, and Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State. Like, it is a tremendous offensive tackle class. It really is. Despite that, I think Joe Alt has a great opportunity to be the first one off the board. Again, I think it's a 2-horse race at the top. I truly believe that it's going to be a Joe Alt versus Olu Fashanu. And I think depending on what team you're talking about, they could prefer one to the other. I do not think that there's going to be a consensus offensive tackle 1 in this class. And I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are even a little bit split at the top. But I do think Joe Alt has a great opportunity to potentially be the first one off the board, because when we're talking about the offensive tackle position and what Joe Alt brings to the game or brings to the table, there's just not many holes that you can poke in it at the top of the class. You talk about the physical part, right? 6'8", 322 pounds. Guarantee, I don't have an arm length measurement on him, but just watching him, I guarantee it's very long. Like, I would be shocked if it was sub 34. Like, it's 34 plus. It has to be. He's got a good wingspan. He's also a former high school tight end. So obviously there is a athleticism to his game as well, which is very easy to see on film. So the physical all checks out. He's also had almost 3 full years of starting experience at the University of Notre Dame. And we talked about the lineage part, which I'll talk about again in a second. But another thing that people care about is where do these players come from a program perspective that are typically good developers of a certain position. And Notre Dame is offensive line U. When you need a good offensive lineman, usually you can turn to the Irish, and usually they are putting out some really good ones.
And he spent a year under Harry Hiestand, which is, I mean, yes, they would have liked it if he spent more years under Harry Hiestand, but he was an All-American under Harry Hiestand, and that's where his game really took off. So that's going to help his how he's evaluated as well.
So the 6'8", 322-pound long offensive tackle also has the Notre Dame and Harry Hiestand stamp on him, which is going to help his projection as well. He also has NFL bloodlines. Obviously, John Alt was a very, very good football player, offensive lineman for the Kansas City Chiefs, is literally in the Ring of Honor, was a multi-time Pro Bowler as well. So he's got the bloodlines. And then also, he is, the research I've done, I believe Joe Alt is projected to be the youngest offensive tackle in the 2024 NFL draft as well. He's only 20 years old right now. He's still only 20 years old. So there's upside to him as well. There's still development that could happen. I thought that was the best part of Joe Alt from 2022 to 2023 is he looks noticeably more filled out and bigger than what he was in 2022. He was still good sized, obviously. He was like 316 pounds, 315 pounds in 2022. But this year, 322 pounds, just looks a little bit sturdier, a little bit stronger. So at the end of the day, what are the holes in his game? Because you would assume that a 6'8" guy might struggle to bend a little bit at the hips. That's not a struggle of Joe Alt. He is actually abnormal in that department. You don't usually see guys as tall as he is that can just seeming to bend at the hips and be comfortable playing from a low stance. You just don't see it very often. So at the end of the day, I think he has a chance to be the first offensive tackle off the board because he just checks every single box. And he also, the biggest development in his game, he was a much better run blocker in 2023 compared to 2022, in my opinion. So there just isn't much that you look at and say, don't love that about his game. Everything just kind of checks out.
That was the one criticism people like Dane Brugler had and some other people had coming into this year where, like, I remember at one point Dane had him like fourth at offensive tackle. I just thought was kind of nuts.
Not anymore.
But I mean, I understood where, but what his big knock was he just doesn't dominate. Well, number one, I think that was misguided because I think Joe Alt is so smooth that it kind of masks how dominant he is because it just
very Joe Thomas-ish.
Yeah, just very just kind of like smooth and easy, and it just looks easy to him. But this season, I think people forgot too, he was a true sophomore in 2022, right? Like a true sophomore. And then you come out this season, and obviously he's a true junior and still young, like you mentioned, Ryan. He's only 20 years old right now. And so
he's super young. Him and Fashanu are both still only 20 years old. So
and he looks like it. I told you about my wife ran into him this summer at Mission Barbecue, and she's like, I see this. He like walks up next to me, and she's like, I kind of do one of these like to get all the way to the top. And she goes, then I look up, and he looks like a little kid in the face, you know what I mean? Because he's this mountain of a man, but because he's very young. And so there's a lot more projection there. But when you break down the film, I kind of felt like late last year, he started really being a more dominant player. And I thought the film showed that. But this year, there was a lot more just physical dominance from Joe Alt. So that literally removed the only criticism that was even remotely valid from about Joe Alt. And like you said, there's no injury history. There's no, I mean, he was a tight end in high school. I mean, not just a tight end, like a six blocker. He caught passes. He caught like the ball, 15, 20 passes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So there's like you said, there's nothing a lot to like. And I think the thing about you talked about, though, he is 6'8", and he plays like he's 6'8" as far as a length standpoint, but he doesn't play like he's 6'8" when it comes to pad level. And I think that is very rare for guys like, and that's going to be my biggest issue. I'll be talking about that when I get into the Tosh Baker conversation. Ryan, is sometimes Tosh can bend, but there's too many times where Tosh just plays like he's 6'8". And lets guys get up underneath him. You never see that from Joe Alt. Like you'd think you'd see it a couple times, Ryan, but I don't know. I can't think of a single snap where I actually saw that, except the one time that guy got into his pads against Duke because he got tripped, or Louisville because he got tripped by Pat Coogan. That allowed that DN to get into his chest. That's the only time I ever remember anybody doing that to Joe Alt in 3 years.
He is a technically savvy football player. Obviously, he understands how to use his hands. He understands how to use his length to his advantage. But Brian, that's like one of the biggest things that I wanted to highlight is the bend, because usually taller guys do struggle with that. Like Tosh Baker is not alone in that conversation. Like most tall offensive tackles struggle to play with leverage consistently. They struggle with it. Joe Alt is not. He is very good at it. And as for like where he fits, I would be shocked as of right now if he gets out of the first 7 picks in the 2024 NFL draft. I would be shocked. I think it's more likely he's a top 5 pick than he's a number 10 overall pick, for instance, right? Like he is that type of dude, in my opinion. And there are plenty of teams in the top 10 that could still use offensive tackles because the offensive tackle play in the NFL right now is terrible. It's not good. It's across the board for the most part. There's very few dominant offensive lines in the NFL. So you could talk about the New York Jets. You could talk about the New England Patriots for sure could use an offensive tackle. The Chicago Bears even potentially could use an offensive tackle to maybe replace Braxton Jones and maybe move him to a different spot at left tackle to hopefully get your bookends for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of offensive tackle potential in the top 10 because teams always need it. And I want to reiterate it one more time before we get out of here. One more time. There's just not many holes here. Every single year, there's like 2 or 3 football players in each draft class where you're just like, it's just such an easy evaluation. You don't need to be good at this in order to watch Joel play and be like, yeah, he's very good. Like, what do you want me to say about it? He's very good. Every year there's a couple slam dunks, and I think that he is one of the slam dunks. If Joe Alt is not a plus starting offensive tackle at the least on the next level, I would be very surprised. If he is not a Pro Bowler, I would also be very surprised. It's just a very clean projection. And Notre Dame has, once again, I think is going to be putting out an excellent offensive tackle into the NFL.
Is it going to basically come down to, Ryan, who's making the decision and some team falling in love with a certain player over him or him over someone else? Is that between him and Fashan? I mean, are they considered kind of the top 2? Are those guys considered top 2?
I would say that they're the top 2 right now. And then there's a little bit of a tier break. And then you're getting into, again, the Talise Fuagas, the JC Lathams, like those types of players who are actually JC, I thought had a great year compared to what he did in 2022. I thought he was very much improved, but yeah, those are the top 2. It's going to come down to, for me, is that they're both young players. They both still have upside. Fashanu, I would say, is a little bit more explosive than Alt, just kind of just out of his stance. Like he is a very explosive football player, and he's also got great foot quickness and power. So there's a lot to like there. I do think Joe Alt's a more complete football player than Olu Fashanu, but I think there are some teams that will look at Olu and be like, if we get the most out of him, he could be better than Joe Alt. But then there's going to be other teams that are like, you know what? Joe Alt's upside is also very high, and his floor is significantly higher than Olu Fashanu. So it's going to be your flavor, man. Like, what flavor of ice cream do you like? It could be Joe Alt. It could be Olu Fashanu. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer, but for me personally, Joe Alt is the best offensive tackle in the 2024 class based on 2023 film.
Well, Fashanu's a year older, right? Obviously, that's something to consider as well. But here's another little statistic for you. If you look at Pro Football Focus, the last 2 years, Olu Fashanu allowed 17 pressures. Joe Alt allowed 13, only 5 this year. He gave up 1 sack, which I believe Dwayne Carter had that against, correct? RJ Oben had that, or did Dwayne Carter have that? I think RJ had that, right?
I think RJ Oben had it. Yep. I think RJ had it.
So that's kind of interesting. The only sack that he's given up the last 2 years, but he did that on almost 100 more pass snaps than did Olu Fashanu. Joe Alt had 13 pressures allowed. Fashanu 17 pressures allowed. Fashanu played 681 pass snaps according to Pro Football Focus the last 2 years. Joe Alt played 772 the last 2 years. So heck of a player. I mean, just a tremendous career at Notre Dame. And yes, I would have liked to see him for one more time, playing one more game, but it is what it is. But as you said, Ryan, it's going to be a big time pick. I just have to think, if you're a team like the Chicago Bears and you've got 2 first-round picks, I just don't know how you leave this draft without not. I mean, you could potentially land your bookend offensive tackles for the next 10 years if you think the right kid's going to be better. Because I read he had so far as a rookie hasn't had a great year. But your point, I think I remember you saying on draft day that he was a guy that was going to need time. He was a guy that was a little bit raw. It was going to need some time to develop, but you can end up getting your bookend tight ends with the kid you drafted last year, plus Joe Alt or Fashanu. I mean, I know Sean Davis has been banging his drum. Like, no, don't draft another quarterback, get 2 impact players at other positions and whatever. We'll see how it goes. It's gonna be fun to see where Joe Alt goes, but we will see Notre Dame's first round NFL draft streak at left tackle is going to get re-implemented now. He is going to, barring something devastating, he will be the 4th first round draft pick in the last 10 years, right? Or 11 draft. So going back to 2014 draft class from Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, and Mike McGlinchey Liam Eichenberg was early second and then now Mike McGlinchey is going to be back in there. So Notre Dame's last 5 starting offensive tackles will have either been a first-round pick, 4 of them, or an early second-round pick, which is what Liam Eichenberg was.
It's pretty good,
certainly
man.
quite a tradition. It's certainly quite a tradition.
So, and if you want to push back the start of Zach Martin's career, you could say since 2010 they've had that streak.
Yeah, I was simply looking at draft classes, but you are correct because Zach was a starter. So since 2010, to your point, all their offensive tackles that started the majority of the games have either been a first or second round draft pick. That's a pretty good streak. And that kind of thing factors into why you get Gilby Lambert. You know, I mean, it's just why you're able to get Charles Jagasaw, guys like that, because they see that and they're like, hey, if I go to Notre Dame, I got a pretty good chance.
Owen Strebig. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Ryan, I'm going to continue this conversation and kind of talk about the impact for Notre Dame, but appreciate you staying on and talking a little bit about the NFL draft aspects for Joe Alt.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me, and I will be back again very soon, folks. See y'all
tomorrow. I have plenty to talk about tomorrow. So let's talk about how this impacts Notre Dame. So obviously you're not only losing Joe Alt, but you're also going to lose Blake Fisher. And so first and foremost, this is going to impact Notre Dame's bowl game. And so you're going to see a much, much different looking Notre Dame offensive line in the bowl game than we saw during the regular season for most of the regular season. Obviously the interior, we got a little bit of a glimpse of the last 3 games. We saw the Pat Coogan, Ashton Craig, Billy Schrouf left to right. Interior in the last 3 games. I thought that group played pretty well once the 2 younger guys were inserted. But now we're going to have a different looking tackle situation. So you had new looking guards in the beginning of the year the last couple games, end of the year. Now the guards and the interior guys are going to be sort of the proven aspects of what we're going to see in the bowl game. And then, of course, this is going to be an opportunity for the 2 players that are going to start in the bowl game to make a statement in their attempts to earn the starting jobs for next year. So let's talk about both of those tackle spots, and we'll dive into those now. And we'll first talk about replacing Blake Fisher, and then we'll dive into the replacing Joe Alt and what that's going to look like. So when you look at right tackle, obviously Blake Fisher has started the last 25 games for Notre Dame at right tackle. He first took over in the Fiesta Bowl at the end of the 2021 season, started all 13 games last year, and he started 12 this year. You know, Blake had some really impressive moments at Notre Dame. He also had a lot of inconsistency, and that's what made his decision to leave kind of so puzzling, was because he's just not ready for that. He's very talented, but just not quite, in my opinion, ready for that. And you just don't see a lot of guys leave after 3 years. And when they do, it's a Joe Alt type of guy who's proven and established. Blake is clearly not that guy. But he made the decision to leave, and he is gone. And so Notre Dame's going to have to fill that replacement. Expected to start in the bowl game. From everything I've talked to, different source I have is that, barring somebody just flat out coming on and beating somebody out in the bowl preparation, the plan going into the bowl game against Oregon State is going to be that Emil Wagner will get to start at right tackle. And obviously Emil's been listed as the backup right tackle all season. When Notre Dame went to their 2s in games, Emil was the guy that stepped in at that spot. This is an interesting situation for Emil, because when I look at Emil this season, here's what we've said about him from the day they signed him. And he's had a very interesting kind of period of time at Notre Dame. And that when he signed or committed to Notre Dame, it was very unexpected. I don't know, other than him in the last 7-8 years, that there was a time when a guy committed where you didn't think Notre Dame was going to get him. There have been guys that have committed when we weren't expecting him to commit, like from a time frame, like, wow, that kid's committing today. I had no idea. But I think him and Noah Boykin are the only 2 that I can remember the last 10 years where you go into an announcement and you're just like, you're not sure, but they're going to pick somebody else. And all the rumblings were that Emil was going to pick Kentucky, and then he picks Notre Dame, and it's worked out great for Notre Dame. And now he's going to make his first career start, barring injury, in the bowl game. And there's a lot to like about Emil. And this is what we said at the time. Look, Emil's a kid with a super high ceiling. I gave him a 5-star upside grade. But the reason I had him a little lower on my current grade is because there's a lot of question marks with Emil. There's a lot of projection with Emil that have to do with his size and just ability to move. And I've said this before. Not everybody that is a 300-pounder plays like a 300-pounder, right? Like Mike Golick was 300 pounds when he finished his Notre Dame career. And when you watch him play, tough kid, gritty and all that, but he didn't move people the way that other 300-pounders move people that just have more natural power and push and lower body, thickness and those type of things. And that's my issue with Emil. He's got very long arms. He's got a really nice punch. he's got fast hands, and when right now, what's ironic is you'd think, long, skinny, athletic, you think he's a better pass blocker than a run blocker. Not in the games that we saw. He's actually a pretty decent run blocker because he comes off the line so quickly. He's very explosive off the line. He's a tough kid. He uses his hands relatively well for a younger player. And there's a lot to like. The problem, however, is that Emil's just got a really light lower half. He's got a skinny lower body. When you see him line up, from behind, he looks more like a tight end. I mean, when you'll see it in the game, you'll watch him lined up next to Eli Raridan or Cooper Flanagan, and you're going to be like, he looks more like them in the stance than he looks like Billy Schrauth or Pat Coogan or Ashton Craig or Tosh Baker. He's just got a really narrow frame and a bit of a thin lower half. That's my big concern. And can he hold up in that regard over 60 plus snaps in a game? And what you saw in games is Emil still evolving as a pass blocker. He can get beat with double moves, but those things. It was good to see those things in games because now you can learn from it. But the other problem is at times, and this goes back to in fall camp when we watched him, he would win a lot of battles, but then when guys would come off with bigger guys would come off with power, they just get into his chest and drive him back. And so he's going to have to do a better job of anchoring, but that's a little tougher when you talk about a guy that just has a little bit of a thinner lower half. So you just want to see him make progress in the bowl game, right? And if he doesn't play great, it's not an end of the world situation because he's got a whole other offseason to continue getting, filling out that lower half. And it's not so much about adding 5 to 10 pounds. It's more about just kind of building up the strength in his core and his lower body, which will allow him to hold up. And of course, there'll be a natural size growth there, but he could gain 15 pounds and it's not good weight and his lower half is still skinny and it's not going to help him. It needs to be good weight. So even if it's only 5 pounds, he's only 292, 293. That's fine for me if it's all in the core area, the buttocks area, and then the lower, like the calves, thigh area, the areas that are going to impact his ability to really play with explosiveness and anchor. Those are the things that I care about. It's not so much the size. I mean, Robert Hainsey was never more than really 295 in his career at Notre Dame. But he's a great technician. And that's something Emil's going to have to learn is just being an enhanced technician, improving the footwork, improving the hands, being, playing with better leverage, not letting guys get too far outside of him or oversetting and letting guys beat him inside, which happened to him in a hit that he gave up earlier in the year. But there's a lot to like about Emil Wagner's potential at Notre Dame. And this is going to be his first chance to kind of show that. It would not surprise me if Notre Dame does some things in the play action game against Oregon State where you keep a back or a tight end in to kind of help him and not just pure drop back all the time, which will allow you to kind of not have to, it eliminates some of the opportunities that you have to just do a pure one-on-one pass rush against him. So some quick game, some movement stuff, just some things to kind of protect him a little bit. And then, the 10 to 12 just drop back snaps, he'll be, you hope that he'll be in a better position to make solid blocks in those instances. Let's go to the other side. Obviously, this is with Joe Alt leaving. This is going to be an interesting one. So we're just going to look at the bowl game for now. And of course, Tosh Baker is a guy that's going to get that opportunity. This is a former top 100 recruit coming out of high school, coming out of Arizona, was one of two offensive linemen that are signed in the 2020 class. Tosh got a chance to earn some starts in his first, be his second season at Notre Dame as a redshirt freshman. If you remember, obviously, that season, Blake Fisher was Notre Dame's starting offensive left tackle. He got hurt in the first game of the year, and that allowed Tosh Baker to step into the starting lineup for, I believe it was 2 games before he then got hurt and missed obviously a few games after that. But he was a starter for them for actually 3 games. No, hold on, it was 2 games because Michael Carmody got hurt against Toledo and Tosh came in, and then Tosh started the next 2 games before he got hurt. And then missed the next 7 or 8 weeks. And so he struggled a little bit, but you kind of expected that. Tosh was always going to be a guy that needed time. He was always a guy that was going to need physical development. And so his numbers that year weren't great. When you look at his production in that time. So, you fast forward to the last year, he only played, I believe, 1 snap last year. This year, he's only played 19 snaps. this season. These are pass snaps, I should say, only pass snaps for Tosh. Let me actually pull up his total snaps here real quick. He played 57 total snaps this year and 16 last year. So most of it's been obviously in the run game. And so let's talk about Tosh's game. He's a big kid, tall kid at 6'8". He's listed at 317. He is skinnier because he's such a long player. He's got some talent. There's some decent foot quickness there for him. He is a guy that, as he's put on more weight, has not been quite as smooth and fluid as he was in high school. And that was one of the question marks I had about him coming out of high school. But he still moves well enough and has very long arms, which is good. And when you watch him in practice and you watch him in games, there's a lot of good snaps from Tosh. You'll see some really good things from him, and you'll see 3, 4, 5 snaps in a row where Tosh comes off the line and gets good movement. And his pass sets are really good. His run blocking was so good in the spring and fall camp, actually, that I was talked to a couple sources that said they contemplated, as they were looking to work their starting offensive line, there was conversations in the coach's office, I was told, about possibly moving Tosh inside the guard and letting him battle for a starting guard spot. They ended up not doing that for a number of reasons, partly because they just couldn't take him away from tackle because of the lack of depth at tackle. The proven depth at tackle, I should say. And so they ended up not making that decision. But that's how much improvement Tosh had made in the run game. Now, we've got to see him carry that into games. But, we saw some solid things from him this year in the run game. The problem is that Tosh sometimes has a tendency to lean over or to bend at the hips instead of the knees. And where this impacts you in the run game is, if you're just kind of blocking like this, right? These are your hips, these are your legs, you lose that power. When you bend at the knees, it allows you to really explode more with your core, so you can kind of bring your hips and your hips and thighs and those type of things with you, and you can drive those through contact. When you kind of just lean over instead of stepping over and you bend at the waist, it takes away some of that power, and you'll see that from Tosh. And then sometimes in pass pro, Tosh will come off and he'll just be too high. He'll just play high. His base will get narrow. And you'll see a pass rushers will see that, and they'll just come and they'll just get right into his chest and just drive him into the backfield. I saw Boubacar Traore do that to him in fall camp, and it was a really impressive snap for Boubacar because he's so explosive off the ball. And I saw Josh Burnham do that to Emil Wagner in that same practice, where Boubacar's so long and so just naturally strong. He came off, he just got his inside hand into Tosh Baker's chest and just drove him right into the quarterback. I think it was Steve Angeli. So he's going to have to avoid those snaps. Now, we saw him late in the year, and I thought Tosh did some nice things late in the year. He was a solid player for Notre Dame in the run game and a solid player in pass pro this season. So, we saw Tosh flash the talent that I hoped he would have coming out of high school. Now, when you look at the production this season, he did allow a couple hurries in the Louisville game. Late in that game, but overall in his pass snaps this year, I thought he looked solid on the season. So he's going to get an opportunity to kind of stake claim to that left tackle position, because as we talk about this, and this is kind of the final topic to this, is the tackle position is one where I would contend that Notre Dame's tackle position is the biggest question mark on the team heading into next season, of what we anticipate, who we anticipate leaving, and those type of things. Easily the biggest question mark, as far as you're replacing two very experienced players, one of which was inconsistent but had some really good moments. The other was just a consistently dominant player. And you're going to have to replace him with very unproven, even with the bowl game under their belts, very unproven players, assuming those guys win the starting job. But you're also going to see it's not going to be handed to Emil Wagner. It's not going to be handed to Tosh Baker. And so when you head into the offseason, they're clearly going to be the guys that are sort of leading the charge, so to speak, from a standpoint of the early depth chart. You're going to have to beat them out to win the starting job. But here's, at the end of the day, here's where I'm at. This is not about Tosh Baker. This is not about Emil Wagner. It's not about Charles Jagasaw. It's not about Selvin Absher. It's not about Gearby Lambert. It's not about Styles Prescott. Those are all guys that I think have potential to be tackles at the next level at this level for Notre Dame, and all have some skill and some talent to work with. This is about Joe Rudolph. And what I mean by that is this isn't an insult to Joe Rudolph. It's not a praise of Joe Rudolph. It's just a statement of fact. The success of the offensive line will not be determined by just the players, but the development of those players. Because here's my overall point. When I look at what Notre Dame has coming back, is you've got Tosh Baker, former top 100 recruit, Emil Wagner, former top 100 recruit, Gilby Lambert, incoming freshman, top 100 recruit, Charles Jagasol, top 100 recruit, Sylvan Absher, 4-star, top 200, 250 caliber recruit. And then obviously Styles Prescott is not a kid that I see in contention next year. He's going to need some time to develop and build up his body. But you want to look at those 5 guys: Tosh Baker, Emil Wagner, Charles Jagasol, Sylvan Absher, and Gilby Lambert. There's not a lot of experience there. Having said that, there's a lot of talent in that conversation. And if you cannot get 2 good stars, not great, they don't have whoever's at left tackle does not have to be Joe Alt. Whoever's at right tackle does not have to be Blake Fisher on his best day. What you need is just consistency. Steadiness is all you need. You don't need dominant tackles. Now, it helps in the run game, but with Riley Leonard coming in, there's some things you can do in the run game that don't require your tackles to have to be butt kickers. Notre Dame is going to run some pin and pull, some counters, some things where you're down blocking with your tackles. You just need them to be steady and show a level of consistency and dependability and not be dominant. If you get dominant, it's great. And my point is this: if you can't get good offensive tackle play, if you can't get 2 guys of Tosh Baker, Emil Wagner, Charles Jagasol, Gilby Lambert, and Sylvan Absher to play at a high level, then I got to question if you're really that guy. I'm sorry, I do. You've got to be able to get those guys ready to play. We've seen Notre Dame come into seasons with inexperienced players before. Liam Eichenberg hadn't played a whole lot of football when he stepped into the lineup in 2018, and he was pretty good that first year. It wasn't great, wasn't nearly as good as he was in 2020 when he's an All-American, a consensus All-American, but he was a pretty good player. Notre Dame went 12-0 that year. And Robert Hainsey stepped into the right tackle job, took that over as a true sophomore. He was rotating with Tommy Kramer the year before, stepped into the lineup, took that position over as just the right tackle as a true sophomore. And again, it was pretty good that season. So we've seen situations where inexperienced players had to step into the lineup and be really good players. Notre Dame needs that. And what happened and why did you get that from a lot of those years? Because you had a guy developing the offensive line that was an outstanding developer of offensive linemen, and here he stand. Now Joe Rudolph gets tested. And so a lot like Al Washington, that first year, there's always some bumps in the road with the first year to new group, and it's a bigger group, a lot of different personalities, a lot of different, I won't say agendas as in a negative thing, but, guys at different places in their development and different wants and needs and things along those lines. You've got to bring it all together. And I don't think the first year went very well for Joe Rudolph. Now you go into year 2, and this is your chance to kind of say, put that year behind me. The guys that are staying are going to be bought in, and if they're not, hey, best of luck to you. You got to go. But you bring in you've got now, 2 classes of kids that will just be your kids. So Charles Jagasol was recruited initially by Harry Hiestand and then later by Joe Rudolph. But actually it was very little. Yeah, Harry Hiestand and Joe Rudolph. But he's only ever been coached by Joe Rudolph. Same with Sylvan Absher, same with Sam Pendleton and all those guys. Gilby Lambert obviously committed to Joe Rudolph and will be coming in to play for Joe Rudolph. And now Tosh Baker goes into year 2 of Joe Rudolph. Emil Wagner goes into year 2 of Joe Rudolph, which means he'll have 2 years under his belt of Joe Rudolph and just 1 of Harry Hiestand. So this is an opportunity for Joe Rudolph to say, hey, look, this is my room now. It's my opportunity to build this group up. And if he can do it and do a good job, then I think Notre Dame's offensive line is going to be just fine. I think their interior has a chance to be really, really good, especially if they allow a battle at left guard and don't just anoint Pat Coogan, but make him beat out Rocco Spindler and Sam Pendleton. And if Tosh Baker beats out Charles Jagasol, then make Pat Coogan beat out Charles Jagasol at left guard. That type of situation. But whoever the starting 5 is, there's going to be 5 talented players in the lineup most likely. And if Pat Coogan's the starter guard, then there's 4 talented players in the lineup and a left guard who is not as talented as the other players, but a tough, smart, heady kid that's going to give you everything you have, a grinder, right? Doesn't have that NFL talent in my opinion, but you're going to get a kid that's got a lot of experience and a kid who's going to be a grinder. So either way, you're going to have either experience or talent in the starting lineup next year across the board. So if you can't get production from that group, then you may not be the guy. And so this is a very big year for Joe Rudolph, just like it was a big year for Al Washington. When you talk about how the first year went and then projecting the year two, you had to replace Isaiah Foskey, you had to replace Jason Adamiola, you had to replace Jacob Lacey, you had to replace Chris Smith, you had to replace some guys that have played a lot of football for you in your time. And then you look at what they did this year, much better group. He made that it was about him now. Hey, this is what we're doing. I don't care what previous coaches did. You're bought into what I'm asking you to do. And they went out and played at a very high level this year. Joe Rudolph's going to have a similar jump. That's really what this boils down to for me, because I'll say it one more time. Tosh Baker, Emil Wagner, Charles Jagasaw, Sullivan Absher, Gearby Lambert. As much as I love Charles Jagasaw, Gearby Lambert might, in my opinion, be an even more natural tackle and a more higher ceiling tackle, pure tackle, than even what Charles Jagasaw was, which says a lot. So between those five guys, if you can't get two good starters and at least one good backup, then I just have to question what kind of coach you are at that point in time. So very, very big offseason for Joe Rudolph. He'll have some talent to work with, but until we see it, it's going to be a big question mark. And I think that how these two kids play in the bowl game, if they play well in the bowl game, it's going to kind of give me, and I would imagine some of you, a sense of, I think they'll be okay. Now, they may not be great, but they show that they can be okay, because Oregon State's going to have a lot of their defensive linemen that played for them this year are going to be playing in that bowl game. And that's a very good defensive line that was for a team that ranked 10th in the nation in sacks this year, which is one of the concerning matchups for me in this game. Having said that, if they can hold their own against that group, then it says, hey, at the very least, you can expect that into next season. And if one of those guys gets beat out, then it's going to be even better, because that means the bar has been raised. And so this bowl game is going to be a very important opportunity for them, a very important moment for them, and for us as fans and analysts that are looking at it to say, okay, should our concerns be heightened, or are they somewhat alleviated that you at least know you have a baseline based on the way these kids played in the bowl game? That's kind of how I see that one. Going to have one more topic coming up. Some news broke during the show, but before we get to that topic, do me a favor, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Final topic that we're going to talk about, and this news kind of came across as we were doing the show, and that is that Jack Kiser announced early in the show, not on our show, but earlier in the show, he announced publicly that he's going to be coming back for the 2024 season. So Notre Dame will have most likely two of their starting linebackers from this season there for the bowl game. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm totally fine with that from a football standpoint. My concern, however, is now I see Al Golden just putting him and J.D. Bertrand inside at linebacker for the bowl game and just running with those guys the whole game and not giving the younger guys a chance to play. I hope I'm wrong, but that's my fear, because we've seen him do it. We saw it in the Central Michigan game when J.D. Bertrand got hurt and they brought their 220. I mean, I know he's listed bigger than this, but he's not a very big guy. They brought Jack Kiser in and put him at Mike in that game and didn't really play Drake Bowen a whole lot. That's a missed opportunity. My fear is that they're going to do that with Jack Kiser now in the bowl game and for next year. And so to me, when I look at this scenario and I look at it, I think there's a lot of value in having a veteran like Jack Kiser coming back. He's a guy that can kind of play all over. As Ryan has mentioned before, there's a lot of special teams value. The key is going to be, do they allow the younger players to push for more reps, if not starting jobs, or do they just plug Jack Kiser into either the Mike or the Will spot? That's my fear. That's my concern. Because as we know, as good of a job as Al Golden has done this year's, he values experience. He values older players. And that's why I kind of thought that they might even lean towards not bringing back any of those guys. But our prediction at the beginning was they would bring one of them back, and we kind of felt like, Jack Kiser might be one of the guys that got brought back because he's probably not going to have the same NFL projection as the other two guys for a host of reasons. Now, Jack's been a very productive player for Notre Dame the last 2 years. And I thought Jack was pretty good for Notre Dame this year in certain roles. The key, however, is you've got to make sure you're getting him in the right role. And that's going to be the key for Notre Dame when you talk about building up and getting Jack Kiser as a part of it is, Jack is good in space. Jack can do some things inside. My concern is I don't think Jack is the guy that can necessarily be an every single down player on the inside. You've got to because I think that takes away a little bit of his ability to run. Now, if you are going to start him inside, I think Will's the place to start him inside. And then have him side by side with Drake Bowen as opposed to putting him in Mike like you did in the spring. So I would imagine that when you get to the bowl game that they will have Jack Kiser as the starting Will and J.D. Bertrand are starting Mike, and then they'll play nickel most of the game. That's what my thought is. Now, Oregon State is a heavy run team. So I'm also curious when they go to three linebackers, do they put Jalen Sneed at Rover? Do they put Jaden Osbury at Rover? Do they put Jack back out at Rover and then bring in one of the Wills? That would be my prediction, or at least that's maybe not prediction as much as what I would do. So I'm curious to see how much three linebacker looks we're going to see in the bowl game. If that's the case, if Jack stays at Rover in the bowl game and you let one of the younger guys play at Will, then that's great. Like I said, my concern is that they're going to just put those two guys inside. Now, when you look at Jack Kiser and what he brings to next year's defense, he's a guy that can play all three positions, which is huge. That provides insurance and depth. He's a guy that can play Rover. Obviously, he could still be your starting Rover if you're going to be a team that plays a lot of three down. We saw Jack this season. I mean, if you look at his Pro Football Focus grade, Jack was a kid that was, I think, third on the Notre Dame defense. Let me see here. Second on the Notre Dame defense. Yeah, second on the Notre Dame defense overall. Number one amongst the starters in Pro Football Focus grade. Not sure quite how if I would agree with that, but what we saw from Jack this season was a guy that was a little bit more productive in certain areas. I thought he was a little bit better against the pass this year. I thought Al Golden did a much better job of limiting the opportunities in which he was to be in coverage, but the one game that we saw him starting this season as an inside backer against Central Michigan, that was the one game he gave up 57 of his 84 receiving yards in that game. But Jack's a kid that played, 15 to 30 snaps a game most weeks. He's a guy that ran around and made a lot of plays in space, many more plays in space this year. Wasn't necessarily as impactful from a pass rush playmaking standpoint as he was in some previous seasons. He didn't have as many hits and such on the quarterback, but he did have more overall pressures. His run stop percentage this year was about the same, or his run stop production was about the same this season as it was last season. But this season he played about 30 more snaps. So I thought Jack was good this season, but I think he's a guy that needs to be a rotational guy. And somebody just said it. If Jack is a rotational guy where maybe he's the number two at a couple different spots in the starting Rover, I can live with that. I'm totally good with that. If he's a guy that they just plug in the middle and play him, 60 snaps a game like they did J.D. Bertrand, then I don't know if that is necessarily the way to go for Notre Dame. Just that would just be a little bit concerning for me, unless Jack can just raise his level of play. So how I feel about this is going to be determined by how he's used. And we just kind of get down to this topic that we've discussed a lot. Marcus Freeman went out and, they've done a great job recruiting the linebacker position. You're going to have Jalen Sneed coming back next year, most likely. You're going to have Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen and Preston Zinner. You got Kingston Viliama Asa coming in this season. Bodie Cahoon, who had a monster senior season in high school, is going to be here. There's plenty of linebackers there. Now you throw Jack Kiser into the mix and your depth at linebacker is even better. And you've got some experience and a potential captain at that position. But if all you're doing is like just stunting the growth of a younger player and you're not allowing them to be more of a rotation like we didn't see this year, which we wish we would have seen this year, to me, I don't know if that's necessarily the way to go. And, we thought we would see a bit more of a rotation this year, and we didn't from Notre Dame. We didn't see them use the younger players or play the younger guys as much as we would like. And it worked out well from the standpoint of the defense was really good this season, but I believe it stunted the growth a little bit of the players in the team. I mean, Jaden Osbury, for example, only played 15 snaps on defense all season. Preston Zinner only played 10, and Drake Bowen only played 56. Now, Drake had a lot of snaps in special teams, and he was a starter on multiple special teams this season and played, according to Pro Football Focus, 147 snaps on special teams as part of the kick coverage, kick return, and punt return teams, but he only played 15 snaps on defense. And if you go through another year of stunting those guys' development by just not playing them, then I don't think that makes you a better football team. I think it makes you a more assignment correct football team, which is important. But I think it stunts their growth and it limits your playmaking a little bit, the position. So to me, Jack Kiser, when he's at his best, is a guy that they are using to do certain things. There are certain things he's really good at. I actually think he's a pretty decent pass rusher when used effectively. I think he's a guy that's a pretty good perimeter run support guy. He's a guy that when you can just let him run, can be a pretty good player for Notre Dame. The question is, can he be a dominant impact every down player the way that a Drake Bowen could be or a Jaden Osbury could be and those type of players? That's the big question mark for me. And that's my concern when I think about how Notre Dame handles this. So again, a lot of potential value in bringing Jack Kiser back, a lot of potential value. But you're going to have to do things a little bit differently, in my opinion, next year than you did it this year, where you don't just plug him into a position and just say you're going to dominate the position and we're just not going to use the younger players because you're just going to go with the veterans. And there's that trust factor. And I get it. Look, guys, trust is important for a football team. It's very important for a football team. You've got to know, especially a linebacker, you got to know those guys are going to hit the right gaps and things like that. But you can't learn those things without the opportunity to learn those things. And that's my big question mark, because the young talent at Notre Dame at linebacker next year is going to be very good. Very good. You just don't want to see it stunted for any reason at this point in time. So if Jack Kiser is used in the right way, which is similar snaps to what he did this year, he's part of rotation, even a 50-50 type of thing, or maybe it's like a three-man rotation where you've got him and two other young guys and Jack kind of plays a little bit of both. I can live with that. I could live with that. He'll have a third down role and other guys will have third down roles. So there's a way that bringing Jack Kiser back next year could be really good for the defense. And there's a way where it could stunt the growth of the defense, in my opinion, because he's just not the every down inside backer that J.D. Bertrand was. And he's not quite the interior disruptor that I believe Marist was this past season. But Jack can do some good things. There's no doubt about it. Jack Kiser is a quality football player if used correctly. And if you do that, and then you really emphasize building up the Drake Bowens and the Jaden Osburys and the Jalen Sneeds and the Kingstons and players like Preston Zinters and the guys like that, Kingston Viliama Asas, you've got a chance to have a really dynamic linebacking core next year with Jack Kiser and the younger players all being part of that rotation, because you'll have that nice blend of experience and youth. The younger guys bring more dynamic ability, in my opinion, especially Drake and Kingston and those guys that are a lot longer than Jack. So those are all exciting potential things. So that's what we're going to come down to is how are they going to use them? My prediction would be in the bowl game that they're just going to plug him in as a starting will linebacker if they start with the nickel, Thomas Harper. If they start when they go to their three linebacker look, I could see them putting him out at Rover and then putting a will in, and that's a way to get them some playing time. That would be what I predict they'll do. Not saying it's necessarily I want them to do. I'm just saying that's what I predict that they'll do. So you have Bertrand and Kiser playing inside. Now the positive is you've got two veterans inside and you have two veterans up the middle, and that increases your chances of going into this game and winning the football game. Because at the end of the day, as I've said, that's key number one. And I believe that Jack Kiser as a starter gives you a better chance to win a football game against Oregon State than just plugging in two new guys Jack Kiser and JD Bertrand as starters gives you a chance to be better prepared to win this football game than not playing two proven starters on a very good defense. My only thing is I just want to see them play the younger guys a little bit more than as a part of the rotation than we saw during the season. Then you can go into the spring and figure out how to properly pick Jack, how to properly, put Drake and Jalen and Jaden and all Preston and Kingston and all the players are going to be coming in. That's going to be something we'll have to figure out because Jack's announcement today wasn't just that he's coming back for the bowl game, but he's coming back for next season. We expect JD Bertrand to not come back for next season. We expect JD to go to the NFL, which is why he accepted a Shrine Bowl invite postseason. Now, he could certainly change his mind. I just haven't heard anything that makes me believe he will make that decision. So that's what's going on. That was the news that kind of broke out a little bit today. So Jack Kiser will be back not only for the Sun Bowl against Oregon State, but also will be back for the 2024 season. So you'll have at least one very experienced player at the linebacker room, and we're going to have to find out how they're going to use them. It's going to be very interesting. So we're going to go to the mailbag next, everybody. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and give us a 5-star review. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And as always, sign up for the message boards at boards.archbreakdown.com. It's time to dive into the mailbag, everybody. We have about 20 or so questions that we'll get into here. We have some super chats and some non-super chats. So we're going to work through those and have a little impromptu mailbag. I don't normally do mailbags on the Notre Dame Midweek Rundown, but today I just kind of felt like a mailbag, felt like talking to y'all a little bit. So Andre Rainey with a super chat. Thank you very much, Andre. Appreciate you. It must be me, but between the portal, the incoming 24 class, and the returning players next year seems way more optimistic than this year. Is the O-line now our biggest question mark? I don't know that I would say that I'm necessarily more optimistic about next year than I was this year. I just felt this year was a huge missed opportunity, and for a host of reasons. What other teams had, you had a lot of proven production. You didn't maximize what this team could be. They pretty much did on defense. Special teams was a little disappointing, and of course the offense was very disappointing in those big moments. But we also saw growth from the offense in a lot of ways this year too, which tends to get ignored. And so to me, I mean, Andre, I'm starting to get a little excited about next year. Just this team could be really, really good, but there's still I'd say more question marks about this team than last year. You're going to have 2 new tackles. You're going to have a new look skill set, group of skill players next year. Your defense is going to lose a lot of veteran players because like one thing that we were pretty adamant about here at IB is we really felt like the defense was going to be better this year. Now, did I think it was going to be as good as it was? I thought it could be as good as it was. Not that it would be, but it could be. And it ended up being so. We said, hey, if the D-line can step up and replace those guys, and you love the secondary talent, and the linebackers got to play better if they can play better, and it all did. D-line was a lot better this year, a lot more consistent, a lot more steady. The linebackers were a lot better this year, and then, of course, the secondary was every bit as good as we thought it would be. So I get with you. I guess I'm not quite there yet, but I think by the time we get closer to the season, I will be. But I do think this team has a chance to be pretty good. I just don't know if this team has the same ceiling as this past year's team from a combination of experience plus talent standpoint. What I could say next year, Andre, is with the portal additions, with the 24 class, like you mentioned, and then the emergence of the current freshmen and sophomores getting another year of experience, I do believe this team is going to be deeper and more athletic than it was this year. And I thought this year's team had a chance to be very athletic. You had some injuries and some different things that happened, and you were very young in a lot of those positions. But next year, a lot of that youth, Jeremiah Love's going to be a second-year player next year. Jadarian Price is going to be a third-year player that's now in year 2 post-injury. That's huge. I think those 2 kids have a chance to be special together. Jabron Payne got a lot of experience this season. You're going to have a lot of experience at the linebacker. I mean, the wide receiver position of the new guys, plus the younger guys got a lot of experience. You're going to be pretty deep at tight end. You're going to bring back a ton of veterans on the defensive line. You're not going to be as veteran at linebacker, but way more athletic and longer. And you're going to lose some experience in secondary, but there's a chance that if Xavier Watts comes back, you could be every bit as good in the secondary next year as you were this year. So I get where you're coming from. The big thing for me is Riley Leonard is the thing that made me start feeling this way, because I do think he has a chance to be a special quarterback. He's going to have to continue to grow and improve as a player, but there's a lot to like there, and I do believe that we're going to see that transition offensively that I talked about. Got a super chat from Kay Grant. Appreciate you, Kay Grant. Today's my birthday. Happy birthday, man. So I thought this would be fun. Best birthday memory you have. Go Irish. Well, I have a couple, and usually they involve going to baseball games or the zoo. So my sister and I had, our birthdays were a day apart. They were 3 years, but a day apart. She was born on May 10th. I was born on May 11th. And so my parents would always, when we were young, would always kind of, they try to have 2 birthdays. But when we got older, we started doing more things where we would kind of go do things as a family for our birthdays, and we'd get to bring friends with us and stuff. So we'd go to amusement parks. We'd always go. Cedar Point was the main one we'd always go to. We'd go over to the Fort Wayne Zoo. So I remember one birthday when I was younger, and I don't remember everything about it, but I just remember I had a great time being with my family. We went to the Fort Wayne Zoo, and then we went to Chuck E. Cheese afterwards. And that was I think the first time I'd ever been to Chuck E. Cheese, or at least the first time I remembered being at Chuck E. Cheese. And that was a lot of fun. Those big giant singing bears freaked me out a little bit, but I also thought it was pretty cool. At the time, I thought the pizza was pretty good. Another year, I had a birthday party at the Ground Round. I just remember that being a lot of fun. A lot of my friends came. And then, of course, we would do birthdays we do Reds games for birthdays as well at times, which I always loved. So those were my favorite memories. And my wife surprised me on my 30th birthday. We were living in Colorado. My wife surprised me by flying my mom out to see us and be with us. And so that was a really, really awesome experience too. Cause I've been living away from my parents for most of my adult life. I mean, I moved out of home to go to college. I would come stay over the summers and work for them. And then there was a brief period where I lived with them, but I mean, I was out coaching and things. So I'd been away from home, but I was always usually like a day drive away. If you want to live in Ohio, if I want to get in the morning and drive, I could be home at night. Colorado's a little different animal. And so, it was being a little bummer being away from my family and stuff. But when my mom flew out for my birthday, my 30th birthday, that was really cool. That was a really cool experience. Tyler Evans with Super Chat. Thank you, Tyler. Tyler Van Dyke to Wisconsin. What do you think? This is going to be determined, Tyler, by which version of Tyler Van Dyke are they going to get? And my fear is that I don't know that Tyler Van Dyke is the guy that I saw 2 years ago anymore. I mean, 2 years ago, boy, I tell you, I mean, I was very high on Tyler Van Dyke. I mean, you're talking about a kid that threw for 2,900 yards and 25 touchdowns, only 6 picks, had a 160 quarterback rating. Then he comes out the next year and he gets banged up and beat around a little bit, only throws for 1,800 yards in 9 games, 10 touchdowns, 5 picks. And then you come out this year and he was, at times, he looked like that guy, and at times he just wasn't very good. I mean, I thought he was brilliant against Texas A&M. Like, if they get that guy, that's going to be really good for Wisconsin, and he thought he was pretty good against Temple in a blowout win, made some big throws against Georgia Tech and had some really impressive throws against Georgia Tech. And then he turns the ball over 3 times in the game. He was really had some money throws against North. He threw a deep ball, and I'm trying to remember who he threw it to, but he threw a deep ball and he got drilled in the chest as he threw it. But I mean, he took a hit and he knew it was coming. And it was a go route up the left sideline, just dropped it like on a dime to the receiver. I'm like, man, that is an NFL throw. That is a big time throw. But he got, turned the ball over multiple times in that game, got hurt. And then when he came back from the injury the next 3 games, he was terrible. He was terrible against Virginia, NC State, Florida State, had 6 picks, no touchdowns, was better against Louisville. I thought was actually pretty good against Louisville. Boston College, was okay. They're just not very good. So he was such an erratic up and down quarterback. But even this year, I mean, if they get the Texas A&M, the North Carolina, the Louisville, BC version of it, I think it makes a lot of sense because he's a kid with a really good arm. He's big. The problem is he just doesn't handle pressure really well. And I mean physical pressure. He just if you can do things to mess him up physically or mentally, he can go in a tank because he looks like an NFL quarterback this game, and then he looks like that dude shouldn't be starting for you anymore in the next game, and that's the concern. But I'll tell you this, I like him a whole lot better than Tanner Mordecai. That is for darn sure. I was not high on that pickup. I mean, if you ever looked at what Tanner Mordecai did against Power 5 teams, it was not good. I am not at all surprised that Tanner Mordecai struggled, to be completely honest with you. The question mark I have is this. If I'd really have to know why they don't feel good about potentially turning things over to one of their younger quarterbacks. That would be something that I'd be very, very curious about, because when I look at Wisconsin's roster, there's a they've got a young quarterback on that. Nick Evers is who it is, who was a freshman this year, redshirt freshman this year, that transferred from Oklahoma. He committed to Florida, went to Oklahoma, left Oklahoma, and went to Wisconsin. What year was Nick Evers? I may be wrong on that. I thought he was in Steve Angeli's class. But let me just look at that real quick. Let me just find out. And he's a younger guy. So just give me 1 second. Yeah, he was in give me a second. What class was he in? This is going to bother me. I thought he was in the Kenny Minchie class. No, he's a sophomore. So he was a sophomore this year. He's a kid that I really liked and committed to Florida, flipped to Oklahoma when Dan Mullen got fired, transferred after 1 year to Wisconsin. I think he's a really talented kid. I think he's a kid that can play. And they must not think much of him, or they're in win now mode. And I just don't know that they should be in win now mode, to be honest with you, because I don't think they have the roster to be in win now mode. And I think I would be concerned if I was a Wisconsin fan. They're not in a position that Notre Dame is in with Riley Leonard. 2 reasons. Number one, Riley Leonard's a way better quarterback right now than Tyler Van Dyke right now. Last 2 years, way better quarterback. Number two, they're not in the situation where a quarterback can kind of take them to the playoff. I don't think they're going to have a playoff team next year, even no matter who the quarterback is. And so you're stunting your growth, but I'm like, but for what's the end game for stunting your growth? Is it just because those new teams are coming into the league and you don't want to just get destroyed next year? Maybe. Okay, I kind of understand that. But I feel like you're stunting the growth of your younger players for a guy that is just not, to me, a needle-moving player based on what we've seen the last 2 years. However, if they get Texas A&M, 2021, North Carolina, Louisville, Boston College version of Tyler Van Dyke, then I would change my mind. I just don't know that you're going to get that guy, because that guy can play like a day 1 or day 2 NFL draft pick, in my opinion. I really like his natural ability. He just hasn't been that guy nearly enough, and you can't have that kind of inconsistency in quarterback. Let's go to the next super chat from Frank G. Another Jersey guy at Notre Dame. Gotta love it. He's obviously talking about RJ Oben there. That would obviously be a big one here. Michael S. asks, will Riley Leonard be available for spring practice? As I said yesterday, I don't know the answer to that. Actually, let me text somebody right now about that one. Hold on a second. See if I can get an answer to that before the end of the show. But I don't know the answer. I'm not saying he will or won't. I'm just saying I have not been told definitively one way or the other, and I honestly haven't asked. I would assume he'll be here for the spring, but I don't want to say for sure because I don't know for sure. And I've told y'all before, I'm not going to tell you something if I don't know it. I'll give you my opinion. I think he will be. I assume he will be, but I don't know for 100% certain. Iden Benami, don't need names. Any big-time players still leaving? Well, yeah, there's some guys that Notre Dame has. I mean, guys, it's not hard to figure out. I mean, there's a couple, at least, big-time players that are going to announce over the next couple of days that they're not playing the bowl game. So, yes, we will see some more on that one. Andy Milton fan, what's the latest news on Nolan Ziegler? Just working to try to get back on the team. That's it. I mean, outside of that, I have the same stance now that I had before. That's a personal, private issue that's related to something that I'm not comfortable talking about. That's Nolan and Notre Dame's news to discuss. And outside of that, it's just not something I'm going to talk about. So I just only brought it up because you gave a super chat, which I appreciate, but it's just, this isn't a knee injury, a shoulder injury, a guy not playing well. This is something completely different, and it's just not something I'm comfortable talking about. Iden Benami also with another super chat. Is Colsey healthy yet? Any issues with Riley Leonard's foot or ankle? Well, I mean, right now, I don't know how healthy he would be to play in a bowl game right now, but neither of those injuries, from what I understand, are going to have a long-lasting impact on him. So he should be fine. You just have to hope there's no setbacks. Is Deion Colsey healthy yet? Yeah, Deion's healthy. Look, I'm not going to say this with 100% certainty, But my understanding is Dion could have played during the regular season. He could have played in November at times, but he was not going to because he basically was, like many players, was not. I mean, he's a junior. He wasn't getting a lot of playing time early. There's an issue there with the position coach. You're probably leaving at the end of the year, and you don't want to waste a year of eligibility for a guy who won't play you like you think you should get played and should have been played, who is just not. You're just not in a healthy situation as a room. Take the red shirt, transfer somewhere, and have 2 years of eligibility left. Well, obviously, I think those plans change now that the position coach isn't there anymore. And so Dion will be able to play in the bowl game and be healthy enough to play in the bowl game, and hopefully can be an impact player. I would really, really like to see Notre Dame try to get Dion involved in this game early. I think he could be a difference maker because if you can get that boundary position to finally – I mean, Notre Dame got very little production from the boundary this year, which was problematic. And I'm actually over the next couple of weeks, I'm hoping to have all my breakdowns done so I kind of show just a big drop in boundary production they had. I mean, the boundary production was awful this year for what you need from the boundary. Dion can be that guy. And then if Dion can step up and be that guy, then you can keep Greathouse and Jaden Thomas out of the boundary as much as they were in the boundary this season. They're both going to have to play in the boundary at times, or at least Great Thomas will, because Dion can't play the whole game. But you hope that Dion give you 30-plus snaps, and then you can use those other guys in other positions. That would be the ideal, the preferred situation. Facilitate and Inform. Have you seen the new Eddie Murphy Christmas movie? It was fun. USC Notre Dame storyline in it. Kind of cool. I have not. I've heard about it, but I have not done it yet. A Bent ND. Besides the kicker and possibly third receiver, do you think they're done with the portal until after the bowl game? Possibly. Yeah, again, I still think they're looking for another safety in the class. So that could be one. And you know, I believe there's a couple other guys that may be good enough to look at. But I as far as just positions of need, Ben, I think those two are the primary ones, plus a deep safety are the primary ones. Just got a confirmation. I asked, will Riley Leonard be here for spring practice? And I was told yes. So looks like he will be with Notre Dame in the spring. So that's a big one. T Guns asks, how many more portal guys are they looking to take? Kind of the similar question. I think they definitely want 2 more. They'll for sure get 1 more. I don't know that a third receiver is a given yet. I know they're pushing for 1, but I don't think they're going to just take a guy just to take a guy. There's some guys that they like, but it's still to be determined if they're going to be able to get those guys. They definitely want a kicker. We anticipate them getting a kicker here soon. I'd be shocked if it didn't happen over the next week, unless it's I mean, the guy's in the portal. It's we know who it is. It's Mitch Jeter is the place kicker for South Carolina. So I'm okay saying it. It's not a secret, but they want to get him. I anticipate them getting him here soon. Outside of that, I don't know that it's given that they'll get anybody else outside of that. That's the only other position that they definitely need another guy. They don't need a third receiver. It's just about, figuring out, can you get the right guy? That's really what it boils down to. Archer 452 says, will we get an episode of you guys revisiting your preseason predictions? I always enjoy it when people look back at the end of the season to see how much they nailed it and how far they are for it. No, probably not. I mean, we haven't done it before. I don't find those kind of shows that enjoyable. We may. I'll talk to the guys about it, but no, we don't normally do that. I mean, there's some things that, we may do a segment. I don't know, maybe a midweek rundown. I'll do something like that. But I hadn't really thought about it, and it's not something that necessarily – because the thing is, like, most of my predictions I don't have written down. I'd have to go back and listen to the shows, and I just don't want to. But obviously you got the record wrong. I had Notre Dame at 11-1 in the playoff. They went 9-3. I actually only got 2 of my playoff teams correct. Actually, I only got 1 playoff team correct this year. I had – my playoff prediction was Georgia, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Washington. The only one I got right was Washington. So I know I got that one wrong. My prediction for Audric Estime's numbers this year, and because remember, Ryan and I had a debate a couple months ago about where Audric would finish yards per carry. I thought he would definitely still be into the 6s. Ryan thought he'd fall into the 5s. He ended up being at 6.4. And I was pretty close to his production. I was way off on Sam Hartman's predicted production. Way off. He didn't even get to 3,000 yards, which if you'd have told me before the season Sam Hartman was going to go throw for 3,000 yards, I'd have asked you how many games did he miss. I would have no. I thought the defense was going to be very good this year. I was one of those people that kept pushing back on the notion that the defense was going to be, was a question mark. I said, look, I don't know if they'll be elite, but they'll definitely be better than they were last year. And if the D line steps up and the linebackers play better, they could be really good. I was right on that one. So obviously, like I said, the record, I was off on that one. So those are the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. Coach Koch says, what is your level of confidence in the wide receiver room? Do the transfers elevate the room despite the departure? Should they be better now than last year? This will be a topic of conversation. I'll probably talk about this probably after the bowl game, just breaking down the receiver room, but just briefly, Coach, to answer your question, I think the receiver room's got a chance to be a lot better. Reason number one, they're going to be coached better, in my opinion, from what I have learned of Mike Brown, talking to other people, and you guys have known I've been complaining about receiver coaching going back to the spring. Liked how much Coach Stuckey got the group to improve in year one from start to finish. That was good. I was glad we saw that. But there were some things I didn't like in the spring, and then early in fall camp, I'm just like, I don't know what they're doing here. It was concerning to me. And so I think they'll be coached better. You get Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey back healthy. They should be better than what they were this year. Year two, Jaden Thomas, and year two, Jordan Faison should be better than year one of those players. And then it's like, okay, you kind of, you're trading Jaden Thomas in the boundary for Deion Colsey and Bo Collins, right? Or you can look at it this way. You're trading Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey in the boundary for potentially Deion Colsey and Bo Collins, or Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey, and Bo Collins. When you look at the field position, you had Tobias Merriweather, who the coaches didn't trust, didn't throw the ball to very much, and Rico Flores, who they threw to a ton, but he wasn't overly productive. As a guy called me last night and we were talking, he's like, do you remember one time that Rico Colsey made a catch where he wasn't kind of wide open? I was like, other than the Central Michigan go route, I really don't. He got a lot of production because he, worked in the middle of the field. He worked in zones that was open. He was a really good blocker. But, I've said this before. I don't think that's a big miss. You give me a combination of Greathouse, who will play inside and out, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Thomas, or all three guys, plus Cam Williams. I think that Z position will be a lot better. You had Chris Tyree and Jaden Greathouse, and then Chris Tyree and Jordan Faison this year. Chris Tyree did a lot of good things, but he was year one of playing wide receiver. I look at sophomore Jordan Faison, sophomore Jaden Greathouse, sometimes Jaden Thomas potentially. I just think there's a chance to be a lot better there next season. So yeah, I do anticipate the wide receiver position being a lot better next year. I do. And, we'll see how much better, but again, the more players, more top level talent. Cam Williams is better than Braylon James, and I'm very high on Braylon James, but Cam is just a better player and a more advanced player. So he'll be better as a freshman than Braylon was as a freshman. I think he'll be better as a freshman than Braylon would have been as a sophomore. I think Braylon was going to play more next year, but he was going to be a guy that maybe in 2025 could step up and play a lot more. So, again, the additions that you're getting, I believe, should allow you to do a couple things. Number one, you got Deion Colsey and Bo Collins in the boundary. As long as Deion stays, I love that 1-2 punch. Bo can also play some Z. You've got Chris Mitchell coming in to play the Z. You've also got Cam Williams coming in to play the Z. Jaden Greathouse can move outside and play some Z, because I would love to see Jaden Greathouse move around. So as I've said before, I don't want to see, and then in the slot, you have Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison. I don't want to see it like it was early this year, where it's just they're the two slots and they only play the slot. I want to see times where those guys rotate, but there's also times when I want to see Jaden Greathouse in the game at Z. So you kind of move them back and forth. And so you look at all that depth and you're like, boy, that's 6-7 really good football players. What I think that does is that now allows you to take Jaden Thomas and make him the jack of all trades that he needs to be. That's where Jaden needs to be, a guy that can play Z, a guy that can play X, a guy that can play in the slot. And now he can get his snaps by moving all around. I think that's what I would like to see from that position coach. And then coach also asks, we know what the running back rotation will look like for the bowl game? I'm going to hold off on talking about that till tomorrow. And we'll talk about that one tomorrow. Because right now, Audric hasn't announced anything, and we need to wait for him to make his announcement before we really dive too much into that. And then coach asks, What can we learn about Coach Gino this season on account of him not having a second transfer quarterback? How do we think he can help Riley this season? We talked about a little bit yesterday. It's he's going to have to really improve his footwork. That's going to be a big key. Footwork. That's the biggest area of coaching that Gino Guidugli needs to implement in Riley Leonard. Get the footwork down. Footwork. Just as a passer, but also really working on getting him comfortable taking snaps under center and turning around, handing the ball off and executing play action. And hopefully he can do a little bit quicker than it happened with Sam Hartman, who took some time to really, really get comfortable with the timing out of play action. Now, it's not unexpected because Sam's offense is a lot different. And, but hopefully Riley Leonard, also being 3 to 4 inches taller, should be able to help him with that transition as well. Brian Hockney asks, what do you think of Jamal Banks' film, and will we look at him? I do believe Notre Dame is looking at him. Will they get him? Will they make that hard of a push? That remains to be seen. But there's a lot to like about Jamal Banks. He's 6'3", 6'4", 205 pounds, skinny kid, vertical player, not as pure speedy as maybe some other players that you could look at, Chris Mitchell, A.T. Perry at Wake Forest, but plenty of speed for that size. He's a long strider. Reminds me a little bit of Tobias Merriweather from that and like a body type standpoint, and from just a long strider. Looks faster maybe than he is. Solid route runner, good off the line. But the thing I love about him, good Lord, his ball skills are nuts. That kid has exceptional ball skills, great catch radius, very strong hands, very dependable. I think the last 3 years, I was looking at this number. I was looking at this earlier, Brian, and I'm going to find this because it was a really impressive number. And I want to just give you the actual number of his production the last year. So let me just pull this up real quick and go to receiving. So over the last 3 years, he has been targeted. Actually, let's just go the last 2 years. He was targeted 148 times. He made 107 catches, that for 405 yards and 13 touchdowns. That's 66% completion rate when targeted. But over that stretch, again, that's 162 targets. He had 2 drops. They both came last year. So that to me is a really impressive number. Now, last year, when he had Sam Hartman, he had 15 contested catches on 23 contested catch attempts for 65.2, which is a really impressive number. And that comes down to strong hands and a great catch radius, which I talked about earlier. If you look at Notre Dame this year, let me just pull up their number. So he had 15 catches on 23 targets of contested catches. Notre Dame as a team this year had 24 contested catches on 48 attempts. The only receiver, let's see here, Jaden Greathouse had 2 out of 3. He was at 66.7%. Jaden Greathouse was as I said, 2 for 3. Chris Tyree was at 4 for 7. He was at 57.1, and then Mitchell Evans was 5.9. So your best receiver, two best receivers on contested catches were Jaden Greathouse only had 3, and then Chris Tyree was 5.9. Mitchell Evans was a 55.6. Tobias Merriweather was 0 for 2 on contested catches, and then Rico Flores was 4 of 9 on contested catches, and for only 44.4%. And Jamal Banks was 15 of 23 2 years ago when he had a legitimate quarterback. So he can bring some things to the table. And the thing I like about Jamal too is he can play in the boundary as well, but he could also be a field guy. He's to me, a pure outside guy. And if you had him and Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell, like there's things you can do to have all three. I mean, you could put Chris Mitchell in the slot at times and have him outside. You can have, Bo in the boundary, Jamal in the boundary. You have Bo in the slot. If you want to kind of go big, Bo has played in the slot before. He played a lot of his freshman year in the slot, actually, at Clemson. So certainly a lot of opportunities there for those guys to make plays. So I actually like him. There's a couple other kids. There's a kid from North Texas who's a really good player. I'd prefer Jamal Banks personally, just because he's played at the higher level. He's more proven at that level. And also because I still think Notre Dame needs outside guys. They have plenty of guys who can play the slot. The more outside guys you get, the more you can use some other guys inside. And Notre Dame played a little bit of 10 personnel this year. And it would not shock me if we see more of that next year, or even, some 20 personnel, especially early in the year when Mitchell Evans isn't playing. there may be some merit to kind of doing some 10 personnel and some 20 personnel. 20 personnel being 2 backs, 3 receivers, 0 tight ends. So 2 running backs, 0, 20 personnel. 10 personnel, 1 back, 0 tight ends, 4 receivers. And so somebody just said Macklin committed to Kentucky. Good. I like Jamal Banks better. To me, he was a shorter kid. You kind of already have him on the roster. To me, I don't know that you have a lot of Jamal Bankses. So I actually like Jamal Banks. Will Notre Dame get him? I don't know. How hard will they push? I don't know. But if of the guys out there, he's somebody that I would really like. And he's shown that he can produce at a high level on a smaller number of reps because he was part of a 5-man receiver rotation the last couple of years, at least especially in 22. Excuse me. So he's probably the one that I would prefer. Yeah, Brandon, thanks for letting me know that Macklin committed to Kentucky. I didn't know that. That's a nice pickup for Kentucky, though. I'll say this, that with him, Cottrell, Brock Vandegrift, and then the running back, Trayanum, they've had a nice portal season as well. All right, let's get to a couple more here before we get out of here. Joe Allen also asks, how confident do you feel in the receiver group now that Notre Dame has the portal receivers and Riley Leonard? Is it good enough to get them over the hump and to the next level? We'll see. I mean, Joe, that's going to require a little bit more reflection. I want to see some of these kids in person in the spring. I want to see Chris Mitchell up close and personal. I want to see Bo Collins up close and personal. I want to see how they're going to use Jaden Greathouse. Does Deion Colsey definitely come back and get the freshman? But as of right now, I'll be shocked if the receivers aren't significantly better next year than they were this year. Shocked. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. I thought this year's receivers going to be a lot better than they were. But there's less questions. There's less, well, hopefully this guy can do this. Hopefully this guy can do that, as there was with this year's group. Joe Allen also asked, does Al Golden become a college head coach or back to the NFL as a coordinator? Well, I mean, there's a chance he stays at Notre Dame. But if he leaves, I think he'll leave for the NFL. I think that's what he would do. If to me, I don't know that there's head coaching jobs right now that he would want. So if he wants to be a head coach in the college, I mean, stay at Notre Dame and wait for Rutgers or somebody else to come available. But I don't know that that's going to happen. So I think he either stays in Notre Dame or goes to the NFL as a defensive coordinator is what I think. Wyatt Kerwin asks, it seems that Joe Rudolph is a big fan of Pat Coogan, but do you think there was or should have been conversation between Pat and the coaches about the young talent gaining on him, passing him? Not when once Rocco got hurt, no. Yeah, I wouldn't have put Sam Pendleton in there over Pat Coogan in the last 2 games. Now, I like Sam Pendleton, and maybe this year Sam gets a shot to push for a starting job, but as a true freshman, I don't know that Sam was necessarily ready for that as a true freshman. My hope is that, Billy's one of the starting guards. Ashton is now there. Like those are guys you're rolling with. When Rocco gets back, let Rocco and Pat battle it out for that guard spot. If Jagasol can't play tackle, let him potentially battle it out for a guard spot, or Sullivan Absher as well. So I hope it's an open competition, but I just don't think that it will be because, as you said, Joe Rudolph seems to love Pat Coogan. And Pat did some nice things this year, but I just think he is what he is. I don't know that he'll get a lot better. I hope I'm wrong. If Joe Rudolph is going to play him a bunch, I hope I'm wrong because he's one of those good stories you want to root for. It's just I also have to be honest. And I saw a tough kid that battled his butt off, but just doesn't have a lot of power and not overly athletic. Where Rocco's not very athletic either, but at least Rocco, when he's right, can play with power. He can really move people. I don't know that Pat can really do that, to be honest with you. Got 3 more here that we'll get to before we roll. Archer 452 asks, after flipping a wide receiver from A&M within the last few days, Syracuse just flipped a 4-star receiver from Stanford. What in the world is going on in New York? Look, we talked about this. I believe I talked about this before they hired Fran Brown, but I said Syracuse needs to hire a guy that can recruit. That's a big key. And when he got hired by Syracuse, Fran Brown as the head coach, you said that's a guy that can recruit. And so far, that's exactly what he's done. He's recruiting very well, and that's the key. You've got to be able to have someone that can attract talent. It's a lot harder to recruit Syracuse now than it used to be. New York City, New York used to have a lot more talent. They used to recruit New Jersey really well. They don't anymore. That's a pipeline they got to tap back into. Pennsylvania doesn't have as much talent as it used to. So it's just harder. They got to go to Florida. They got to go to Georgia. They got to go out west. They got to have a much higher success rate in New York and in New Jersey. And so you need and Dino Babers, great guy from everything I've heard, really great guy, just not a great recruiter and didn't have a lot of great recruiters on the staff. It's imperative, and I think Fran Brown brings that on top of a pedigree of playing coaching on outstanding football teams. So you need a guy that can recruit, and that's an absolute must, and so far that's what they have. W.O. Lewis asks, with the addition of and subtractions for the 24 roster and everyone you expect to be back, is it a playoff roster in 24? If not, what piece or pieces are missing? It's a little too early for that for me. Here's why. I need to know everyone that they're going to get. We still don't know who all is leaving. We don't know who all is coming back. Xavier Watts' decision could impact that. Riley Mills' decision will impact that. Well, let me rephrase. Xavier Watts' decision will impact that tremendously, good or bad. Same with Riley Mills. They're still trying to get some more portal guys. So it just depends. I mean, my gut right now is yes, it's a playoff team, a 12 team with the 12 team. And then when you look at some of the moves being made by Notre Dame's opponents for next year, I really like how they stack up against their actual schedule. So I need to just know kind of what the complete roster is going to be. I need to know what the opponents are going to be bringing back and what they're going to be getting in the portal. There's just still a lot of unknowns. Off my gut, off of what I do know, I absolutely think Notre Dame should be competing for a playoff spot next year and a higher seed playoff spot, meaning 5 to 8, where they're hosting a home game playoff spot next year. Yes, that is my gut reaction instinct, but I don't want to definitively say yes or no or whatever, because I just really need to study a lot more. But I'll be surprised if I do the study and we do see who everyone gets and doesn't get, and then I'm like, yeah, I don't know, this is a 9-3 team. That'll surprise me. To be honest with you, that'll surprise me. Then last question, or actually not a question. Zach Martin says no question, but want to reiterate how important the portal has been to Notre Dame, and despite all the departures, it has been a massive net win for Notre Dame. There's no doubt. Look, I know a lot of people don't like the portal. I get it. I don't like the portal the way that it is. But Marcus Freeman would be an absolute fool to just ignore the portal. And you can't build your team around it. It has to be a supplement to high school recruiting, and that's exactly what he's done. And he has said all along, listen, we're always going to be a high school-driven team, and I'm 100% support that. But you also need to be able to make sure that you are doing the things that you need to do as a program to ensure that you're also maximizing and supplementing your roster with portal players that can either be A, depth fillers, or B, guys that come out and are impact players. You need to do both of those things. And so if you're able to do that, then I believe you have a chance to go out there as a program and really build a roster the right way. And if you don't do that, then you're going to have a tougher time building that. I just feel like you just can't ignore it. I'll just say that. You can't ignore the portal. You have to use every avenue possible for talent acquisition. Now, when I say every avenue possible, obviously you're not going to go to JUCOs unless there's an anomaly kid that just was overlooked and went there. He's a great student, but you're just not going to get that. But I think it has to be a supplement to your other things. And I think that's exactly what Marcus Freeman's done. And then you look at Riley Leonard and Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and RJ Oben and potentially getting the kicker. And there's a couple other kids they're looking at. Yeah, they're using it and they're getting depth. Oh, Jordan Carter. I keep forgetting to add Jordan Carter. But yeah, you're using it correctly. You're not bringing in volume. You're targeted. And I think that's exactly where they needed to be. And yeah, I like what they're doing. So I'm with you, Zach. I think it's definitely been a plus for Notre Dame so far, and they're not done yet. And then hopefully get to the point where you don't need to bring in as many guys, or when you are bringing in portal guys, it's more for depth because or somebody went to the NFL early and had a great year. Guy comes out next year and you think it's going to be phenomenal, and you think it'd be a breakout, and you're expecting him back for a senior year, but he kind of, or you're not expecting him to have a breakout till a senior year, but he comes out as a junior, has a monster season, and he leaves. and you're like, well, we were kind of recruiting to think we'll replace him as a 4-year guy, but now we got to replace him as a 3-year guy. So let's go out and get a portal guy to bridge that gap between our younger players. Yeah, that stuff will happen, and that's okay. But it's that, not building your entire team around it like some teams are doing. So I really like what Notre Dame is doing in the portal. I do, and props to Chad Bowden and the new coach. I'm drawing a blank on his name off the top of my head. Matt Jensen, I think is his name. Jansen is his name, I believe. Somebody can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. But those two guys are both a big part of it. Obviously, Chad and his team, Dre Brown. I heard that Dre Brown played a really big role in the most recent portal pickup in that regard as well. So you've got a lot of guys that are involved in this process, and they're taking their cues from the head coach, and then the other assistants who are, kind of telling them what the needs are, and they're going out there and finding and impact players. And look, here's the thing: when the portal opened up, as soon as guys, they were on guys immediately. They knew exactly who they wanted to target once the portal opened up, and they went after those guys. And you have to give them a lot of credit for that. So I think they're doing a great job on that. That's going to do it, everybody, for today's show. Thanks for being with us today. I really very much enjoyed today's show. Hope you guys did as well. I want to thank you all for being with us, as I said, and I want to encourage you all to do us a favor. Do us a solid. These things help us out. Hitting that like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell. The notification helps you. The like helps us. When you comment on the show, it helps us. When you give us 5-star reviews on the podcast platform, that helps us. And of course, when you sign up for the message boards, that definitely helps us. So give that a whirl as well. So thanks for being with us today, everybody. We will have I believe we'll have IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. I'm pretty sure we will. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll have a lot more to talk about tomorrow. Ryan and I will, and hopefully these announcements all come out soon, so we can finally start previewing the bowl game and talking about the matchup between Notre Dame and Oregon State. See, just find out who those teams' rosters are. So anyway, folks, appreciate you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.